Sometimes the things we've spent a lifetime running from are exactly what we need to face to finally be free. When 62-year-old Brynn Halver walked into a dusty livestock auction and paid $1 for a nearly blind black stallion, folks thought she'd lost her mind. But Brynn saw something no one else did, a faded brand on the horse's flank that matched the ranch her father disappeared from 40 years ago. The same father who vanished without a word when she was just a teenager, leaving behind nothing but whispers, shame, and questions that never got answered. Now, with a worn map she's kept hidden all these years, Brynn sets out into the high country on that old horse, determined to uncover the truth about what really happened. What could an old horse's brand reveal about a family secret buried for 4 decades? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn air carried the scent of pine and wood smoke through the valley as Brynn Halver guided her old pickup truck down the rutted road, leading away from the livestock auction. In the trailer behind her, the black stallion shifted his weight, adjusting to the movement. She glanced in the rear-view mirror, watching the dust settle behind her, and allowed herself a moment to consider what she'd just done. $1. That's all it had cost her to buy back a piece of her past. The auctioneer had looked at her like she was simple-minded when she'd raised her hand. A few folks in the crowd had chuckled. The horse was old, ancient by most standards, with clouded eyes that could barely make out shapes and shadows. His coat was dull, his ribs showed through, despite someone's effort to feed him up before the sale, and he moved with the careful deliberation of an animal who'd learned that the world could be unkind. But Brynn had seen the brand on his left flank, faded, nearly invisible beneath years of dirt and neglect. But there, the Circle H with the mountain peak rising through the center, her father's mark. Jacob Halver's brand from the ranch he'd worked before he disappeared in the spring of 1985, when Brynn was just 19 years old. She'd been living alone in the mountains for the better part of 2 decades now, in a small cabin she'd built herself on 20 acres of land her mother had left her. The cabin sat at the end of a logging road that most people had forgotten about, surrounded by Douglas fir and lodgepole pine, with a view of the Bitterroot Range that changed with every season. She kept chickens, grew what vegetables the short growing season would allow, and made her living doing odd jobs for folks in the valley below. Fence repair, horse training, the occasional guiding work for hunters who needed someone who knew the back country. People in town called her a recluse. She preferred to think of herself as selective about company. The drive back to her cabin took 40 minutes, winding through national forest land and past a few scattered ranches where people still worked the land the way their grandparents had. She knew most of them by sight, if not by name, and they knew her the same way. There was a comfortable distance in those relationships, a mutual respect that didn't require much conversation. When she pulled up to her cabin, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. She took her time unloading the horse, letting him smell the air and get his bearings. He was cautious but not fearful, and she appreciated that. Fear could make an animal unpredictable. Caution was just good sense. She led him to the small corral she'd built years ago, back when she'd kept a mule for packing supplies into her hunting camps. The water trough was full, and she'd put out fresh hay that morning, almost as if she'd known she'd be bringing someone home. "You'll be all right here," she told the horse, running her hand along his neck. His coat was coarse under her palm, and she could feel every vertebra along his spine. "We'll get some weight on you, give you a reason to stick around." The horse lowered his head to the hay, and Brynn stood there, watching him for a long moment before heading inside. Her cabin was simple. One main room with a wood stove, a kitchen area along one wall, and a sleeping loft accessible by a ladder. She'd built bookshelves along another wall, filled with volumes she'd collected over the years. Western history, field guides to plants and animals, a few novels she returned to when the winter nights grew long. On a small table near the window sat a wooden box she hadn't opened in months. She made herself a pot of coffee and sat down at the table. Outside, the light was fading to that particular gold that only comes in autumn, turning everything it touched into something worth remembering. She pulled the wooden box toward her and lifted the lid. Inside was her mother's leather journal, worn soft with age and handling. Beside it, a bundle of letters tied with string, a few photographs, and underneath everything, a folded topographical map that had been handled so many times the creases had worn thin. Her mother, Brynn Halver, had died 3 years ago at the age of 81. She'd spent the last decade of her life in a care facility in Missoula, her mind gradually loosening its grip on the present while the past remained sharp and vivid. Brynn had visited her every week, sitting beside her bed while Grace talked about people and events from 50 years ago as if they'd happened yesterday. But she'd never talked about Jacob, never explained why he'd left or where he'd gone. Whenever Brynn had tried to bring it up, her mother's eyes would cloud over with something that looked like fear, and she'd change the subject or simply stop talking altogether. It was only after Grace died, when Brynn was going through her mother's belongings, that she'd found the journal. It had been hidden in the lining of an old suitcase, carefully concealed, as if Grace had wanted it, both preserved and secret. Brynn opened the journal now, turning to a page she'd read dozens of times. Her mother's handwriting was small and precise, each letter formed with care. March 15th, 1985. Jacob came home today with that look in his eyes, the one he gets when he's working out a problem in his head. He wouldn't say what it was, but I could see him thinking through dinner, barely touching his food. Brynn asked him if something was wrong at the ranch, and he just smiled and said everything was fine. But I know my husband. Everything is not fine. A few pages later, March 28th, 1985. He's been making maps. I saw them spread out on the table in his workshop when I brought him coffee this morning. Survey maps with marks and notes I don't understand. When I asked what he was working on, he folded them up quick and said it was just ranch business. But Jacob's never kept ranch business from me before. And then, just a week before he disappeared, April 3rd, 1985, he found something he shouldn't have. They know. I can see it in how he watches the road, how he startles at every sound. He told me tonight that if anything happens to him, I should keep Brynn safe. Keep her away from all of this. I asked him what he meant, and he just held my hand and said, "Promise me, Grace. Promise me you'll protect our girl." I promised. God help me, I promised. The entry for April 10th, 1985, was brief. Jacob didn't come home last night. His boss from the ranch called this morning, asking if he was sick. I said I didn't know where he was. That's the first lie I've told in 20 years of marriage. I pray it's the last. But there were more lies after that. Lies to the sheriff who came asking questions. Lies to the neighbors who wanted to help search. Lies to Brynn, who'd stood in the kitchen with tears streaming down her face, demanding to know where her father had gone. "He left us," Grace had said, her voice flat and final. "He left, and he's not coming back." Brynn had believed her mother for years, believed that her father had simply walked away from them, chosen some other life over his family. The anger had burned in her chest for a long time, had colored every decision she'd made. Her choice to stay in Montana, when she could have gone anywhere, her retreat into the mountains, her carefully constructed solitude. It wasn't until she read the journal that she understood. Her mother hadn't been protecting a lie. She'd been protecting her daughter. Brynn closed the journal and picked up the folded map. It was a topographical map of the high country north of here, the kind her father would have used in his work as a land surveyor. He'd worked for the Pritchard Ranch for 15 years, mapping property lines and helping settle boundary disputes with neighboring ranches and federal land. Someone had marked a location on the map in pencil, a small X with the words "Last Camp" written in handwriting she recognized as her father's. The location was remote, accessible only by horseback or on foot, in an area where the forest gave way to alpine meadows and rocky peaks. She'd studied this map countless times over the past 3 years, trying to decide if she had the courage to follow it. The sensible part of her brain said it was foolish. 40 years was a long time. Whatever had been there was gone now, reclaimed by weather and wildlife and the patient work of time. But the horse had changed something. Seeing that brand, knowing that this animal had some connection to her father's last known location, it felt like a sign, or maybe just an excuse to finally do what she'd been afraid to do all along. Outside, full darkness had settled over the mountains. Brynn lit the kerosene lamp on the table and made herself a simple dinner. Beans and cornbread, the same meal she'd eaten 1,000 times before. She ate slowly, thinking through what she'd need for a trip into the high country this late in the season. The weather could turn any time now. Snow in the high elevations wasn't uncommon even in early October. She'd need warm gear, enough food for at least a week, and supplies for the horse. He'd need grain to supplement whatever grazing he could find, and she'd have to go slow, let him build his strength. She was still thinking through the logistics when she heard a vehicle coming up her road. Headlights swept across her windows, and she stood, moving to the door. Visitors were rare, especially after dark. The truck that pulled up in her yard was familiar. Sheriff Ben Coulter's personal vehicle, not the official one. He climbed out slowly, a tall man in his 60s with grey hair and a weathered face that had seen most everything this county had to offer. Brynn stepped out onto her porch. "Evening, Ben." "Brynn." He touched the brim of his hat. "Saw you at the auction today. Figured I'd stop by. Make sure you got that horse home all right." "He's fine. Settling in." She studied the sheriff's face in the lamplight spilling from her door. "But I don't think you drove all the way up here to check on a horse." Ben was quiet for a moment, his hands in his pockets. "Someone asked me who bought that stallion. When I said it was you, they got real interested in knowing why." "Who's they?" "Folks with long memories." He met her eyes. "That brand means something to some people. They're wondering why Jacob Halver's daughter would buy a horse wearing his mark after all these years." Brynn felt her jaw tighten. "It's my business why I bought a horse." "It is," Ben agreed. "But I'm asking you as a friend. What are you planning to do?" She could have lied, could have said she felt sorry for the animal, which was partly true. But Ben had always been straight with her, and she owed him the same courtesy. "I'm going to find out what happened to my father." The sheriff sighed, and it was the sound of a man who'd been expecting exactly that answer. "Brynn, your daddy disappeared 40 years ago. The case went cold a long time back. There's nothing up in those mountains but old ghosts." "Then I'll talk to the ghosts." "It's not safe, not just the wilderness, though that's dangerous enough this time of year. There are other considerations." "Such as?" Ben looked uncomfortable. "Before your father disappeared, there were rumors. Talk that he'd gotten himself mixed up in something that wasn't his concern. Some folks said he was planning to run off, Others said he'd been stealing from the ranch. I never believed any of it, but that doesn't mean everyone else felt the same way. My father wasn't a thief. I know that. But if you start digging around, asking the questions, you might not like what you find. And some folks might not appreciate you looking. Brynn crossed her arms. Is that a warning, Sheriff? It's friendly advice from someone who's known you since you were a kid. He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. You get into trouble up there, you call me. I don't care what time it is. She took the card, slipping it into her shirt pocket. I appreciate the concern, Ben, but I can take care of myself. Never doubted that. He turned to leave, then paused. Your mother, Grace, she came to see me once, about a year before she went into the care home. Her mind was still sharp then. She asked me to promise that if you ever started looking for answers about your father, I'd try to keep you safe. What did you tell her? I promised. He looked back at Brynn. So that's what I'm doing. Be careful up there. He drove away, his tail lights disappearing down the road, and Brynn stood on her porch for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the forest. An owl called from somewhere in the darkness. The wind moved through the pines with a sound like rushing water. She thought about her mother's promise to her father, and the sheriff's promise to her mother. All these promises, stacked on top of each other like stones, building a wall between her and the truth. Tomorrow, she'd start tearing that wall down. She went back inside and began making a list of supplies. Brynn spent the next morning organizing her gear on the cabin floor, creating neat piles of everything she'd need for the journey. Sleeping bag, tent, cooking supplies, first aid kit, rope, a hatchet, waterproof matches, water purification tablets. She worked methodically, checking and double-checking each item. The map lay on the table, calling to her attention every time she passed it. She'd studied it so many times she could have drawn it from memory. But she picked it up anyway, unfolding it carefully. The paper was brittle at the creases, threatening to tear if she wasn't gentle. Her father's handwriting marked several points along what appeared to be a trail leading deep into the back country. Small notes accompanied some of the marks. Good water, rocky crossing, meadow, elk. And at the furthest point, nearly 20 miles from the nearest road, those two words, last camp. She was trying to calculate how many days it would take to reach that location when she heard footsteps on her porch. Before she could reach the door, someone knocked. 3 firm raps. Standing on her porch was a woman Brynn didn't recognize. She was perhaps in her mid-50s, dressed in clean jeans and a barn coat, her grey hair pulled back in a practical braid. Her face had the sun-weathered look of someone who worked outdoors. "Can I help you?" Brynn asked. "I hope so. I'm Linda Pritchard. My husband Owen owned, the ranch where your father worked." Brynn felt her stomach tighten. "I know who the Pritchards are." "May I come in? I won't take much of your time." Against her better judgment, Brynn stepped aside. Linda entered, taking in the cabin with a quick, assessing glance. Her eyes settled on the map spread across the table. "I heard you bought a horse yesterday," Linda said. "The old black stallion. Word travels fast. In a small county it does." Linda moved closer to the table, looking at the map. "That's a survey map. Your father's work?" Brynn folded the map, removing it from view. "What do you want, Mrs. Pritchard?" Linda was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was gentler. "My husband, Owen, he's been carrying something heavy for a long time. When he heard about the horse, about you buying it, he said maybe it was time to let it go. So I'm here to give you something." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in soft cloth. She placed it on the table and unwrapped it carefully. It was a pocket watch, silver and tarnished with age. Brynn picked it up, turning it over in her hands. On the back was an engraving, "To Jacob, for service beyond measure." "Where did you get this?" Brynn's voice came out rougher than she intended. "Owen's had it for 40 years. Your father left it at the ranch the day before he disappeared. Owen kept meaning to return it, but then, well, everything happened, and he didn't know how. He wants you to have it now." Brynn opened the watch. The mechanism inside was frozen. The hands stopped at 3:47. She looked up at Linda. "Your husband knew my father was in trouble. Owen knew something was wrong, yes, but he didn't know what. Your father wouldn't talk about it." Linda paused. "There's something else. Owen thinks you should talk to him before you go up into those mountains. He has information that might help you understand what happened. Why didn't he come himself? He's not well. His heart." Linda shook her head. "He can't make the trip up here anymore. But if you came to the ranch, he'd tell you what he knows. He should have told you years ago, but fear kept him quiet. He's not afraid anymore. At his age, what can they do to him?" "Who's they?" Linda met her eyes. "Come talk to Owen. Let him tell it in his own words. We're at the old home place, same as always. You know where that is?" Brynn nodded. The Pritchard Ranch had been one of the larger operations in the valley when her father worked there. She'd been there a few times as a child, riding in the truck with her father when he needed to pick up supplies or drop off paperwork. "I'll think about it," Brynn said. "Don't think too long. Owen's 82 years old, and his doctor says his heart could give out any time." Linda rewrapped the watch and pushed it across the table toward Brynn. "That belongs to you, regardless. Your father was a good man. Owen wants you to know that he knew it, even when other people were saying otherwise." After Linda left, Brynn sat at her table, holding the watch. She wound the stem carefully, feeling the mechanism catch and begin to turn. The watch ticked to life, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. 3:47. She didn't know if that meant anything or nothing, just a moment when someone had wound a watch and then stopped paying attention to time. She thought about Linda's invitation. The Pritchard Ranch was a detour, would cost her at least a day. But if Owen Pritchard had information about her father, real information, not just rumors and speculation, she needed to hear it. The afternoon was slipping away. She went outside to check on the horse, bringing him fresh water and grain. He was moving better today, seemed more alert. She ran her hands over his legs, checking for heat or swelling, and found him sound. "You've got a name yet?" she asked him. He turned his clouded eyes in her direction, ears forward. "Can't keep calling you the horse. That's not respectful." She thought about it while she brushed his coat, working out the tangles and dirt. He stood patiently, clearly accustomed to being handled. Someone had cared for him once, before age and blindness made him worthless in the eyes of whoever had sent him to auction. "Tracker," she said finally. "That's what I'll call you, because you're going to help me track down the truth." The horse blew out through his nostrils, and she chose to interpret that as agreement. That evening, she loaded a few essentials into her truck and set out for the Pritchard Ranch. The drive took 30 minutes, following paved roads that eventually turned to gravel. The ranch sat in a wide valley, with the main house visible from the road, a 2-story structure that had been built sometime in the 1920s, with additions added over the decades as the family grew and prospered. Owen Pritchard was waiting on the porch when she pulled up. He'd aged considerably since the last time she'd seen him, which had been at her mother's funeral. He moved slowly, leaning on a cane, but his eyes were sharp when they met hers. "Brynn Halver," he said, "you look just like your father." "People say I favor my mother. They're wrong." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Sit with me a minute. My knees don't like stairs anymore, and I'd rather talk out here than inside where Linda will hover." She sat, and for a moment they just looked out at the valley together. The land rolled away in all directions, golden grass moving in the wind, cattle grazing in distant pastures. It was beautiful country, the kind that got into your blood and never let go. "I've been a coward for 40 years, Owen said finally. "I'm not proud of it, but I'm done being scared." He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out another small bundle. This one contained a silver pocket watch, nearly identical to the one Linda had given her. "Your father and I both got these," Owen explained. "From the old man, my grandfather. He gave them to us after we finished a particularly difficult survey job together. For service beyond measure, he had them engraved. Your father was the best surveyor I ever worked with. Precise, honest, thorough. He found things other people missed." "What did he find that got him killed?" Brynn asked quietly. Owen looked at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "So you know." "My mother's journal. She didn't write it outright, but I can read between the lines. My father didn't leave. Someone made him disappear." "Yes." Owen's voice was heavy. "And I've known it all along. I just didn't have the courage to say so." He stood slowly, using his cane for support. "Come with me. There's something in my office you need to see." She followed him into the house, through rooms filled with furniture that had witnessed generations of Pritchards. Linda appeared in a doorway but said nothing, just watched as Owen led Brynn to a small office off the main hallway. He unlocked a desk drawer and pulled out a folder, yellowed with age. Inside were papers covered in her father's precise handwriting, survey notes, maps, calculations. "This is part of your father's last job," Owen said. "A property survey for some land adjacent to our northern boundary. It was supposed to be routine. But Jacob found something. There were mineral deposits on land that was supposed to be protected, federal land, and there were active mining operations where there shouldn't have been any." Brynn scanned the notes. Her father had documented everything meticulously. GPS coordinates, photographs of equipment, detailed descriptions of the mining activity. "Who was doing the mining?" she asked. "Halstead Mining Corporation? Big operation out of Denver with connections that went all the way to Washington. They'd been paying off the right people to look the other way while they extracted minerals from protected land, worth millions, maybe more. And my father was going to report them. He told me what he'd found, showed me the evidence. I told him to be careful, that these weren't the kind of people you crossed lightly." Owen's hands shook slightly as he touched the papers. 2 days later, he was gone. And 3 days after that, 2 men in expensive suits came to my ranch. They asked if Jacob had shared any of his survey findings with me. I lied, said I didn't know what they were talking about. "Did they threaten you?" "They didn't have to. They made it very clear that accidents could happen. Ranches could burn, families could be hurt. I had a wife and 3 children. I chose to protect them." Brynn felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced it down. Owen was being honest now, and that took courage at his age, with his health failing. "They asked about your mother, too," Owen continued. "I told them Grace didn't know anything about Jacob's work. I don't know if they believed me, but they left her alone. Maybe they figured she was scared enough to stay quiet." And she was. He closed the folder and held it out to Brynn. "This is yours now. It's not everything your father had. He must have hidden the bulk of his evidence somewhere. But it's enough to show what he was investigating. That map of yours, the one marked Last Camp, I'd bet my ranch that's where he hid the rest. Brynn took the folder, holding it carefully. Why are you telling me this now? Why not years ago? Because I'm dying, and I'm tired of carrying it. Because that horse showing up at auction with Jacob's brand on it felt like a sign. And because you deserve to know the truth about your father. He was a brave man. He was trying to do the right thing, and he died for it. Who killed him? I don't know for certain, but Halstead Mining had a man, a fixer they called him. Raymond Voss. If someone needed to disappear, Voss made it happen. He's still alive, still working for them as far as I know. Still making problems go away. Brynn stood, the folder under her arm. Thank you for this. For finally telling me. Owen reached out and gripped her arm, his hand surprisingly strong. Be careful up there. These people, they've got long reach and longer memories. If they find out you're looking for your father's evidence, they might decide history needs to repeat itself. I can take care of myself. Your father could too. Didn't save him? Owen's eyes were wet now. Promise me you'll be smart about this. Get the evidence if it's still there. But then take it to people who can do something with it. Federal authorities, the press, someone beyond the reach of local corruption. Don't try to be a hero. Brynn didn't make promises she might not keep. She simply nodded and left. On the drive back to her cabin, she kept glancing at the folder on the seat beside her. Her father's handwriting, his careful documentation, his determination to do the right thing, even when it put him in danger. She felt closer to him than she had in 40 years. When she got home, she spread the survey notes across her table alongside the map. The pieces were starting to fit together. The marked location on the map, Last Camp. That's where her father had gone to hide the evidence. And that's where she would find the truth. She began packing in earnest, working late into the night. This was no longer just a personal quest for closure. This was about finishing what her father had started. About bringing justice for a good man who'd been silenced for doing his job. Tomorrow, at first light, she and Tracker would begin the journey into the high country. Whatever was waiting up there, answers, danger, or both, she was ready to face it. Her father's watch sat on the table, ticking steadily. She picked it up and slipped it into her pocket, where it would stay for the duration of the journey. Time had stopped for Jacob Halver 40 years ago. But it was about to start moving again. The morning broke cold and clear, the kind of October day that promised beauty and warned of hardship in equal measure. Brynn was up before dawn, moving through her familiar routines with the knowledge that she wouldn't be back for at least a week, possibly longer. She fed the chickens extra grain and filled their water to the brim. The neighbor's kid, Tommy Jensen, would come by every other day to check on them. She'd arranged that yesterday with a phone call. Tommy was 16 and reliable, the kind of young man who understood that when you gave your word, you kept it. Tracker was waiting at the fence when she approached the corral, his ears pricked forward despite his clouded eyes. She'd spent an hour the previous evening fitting him with the saddle and tack she'd found in her barn, equipment she'd used years ago on the mule. The saddle was old, but well-maintained, the leather supple from regular oiling, even though it hadn't been used in years. "Morning, friend," she said, running her hand along his neck. "You ready for an adventure?" The horse nickered softly, and she took that as answer enough. She saddled him carefully, checking each strap and buckle twice. The saddlebags were packed with her essential gear: tent, sleeping bag, food for a week, grain for Tracker, the first aid kit, rope, and her father's survey notes, sealed in a waterproof bag. She'd debated bringing the original map, but decided against it. She'd copied the relevant sections into a small notebook that fit in her jacket pocket. If something happened to her, the original would still be safe in her cabin. Her rifle went into the scabbard, a Winchester .30-30 that had been her father's. She'd kept it cleaned and oiled all these years, and she was a good shot. The mountains had taught her that skill out of necessity, not sport. By the time the sun cleared the eastern ridge, she was mounted and ready. Tracker stood steady beneath her, his blindness making him cautious but not fearful. She'd learned last night, while working with him, that he trusted his other senses. His ears swiveled constantly, tracking sounds, and his nostrils flared as he processed the wealth of information carried on the wind. They set out heading north, following a trail that wound through the forest. The going was slow at first as Tracker learned to trust her guidance. She kept the reins loose, using her voice and gentle pressure from her legs to direct him. Within an hour, they'd established a rhythm. The forest was quiet except for the sounds of their passage, hoofbeats on the soft earth, the creak of leather, the occasional snap of a branch. Brynn had always loved this kind of solitude, the sense of being small beneath the vast canopy of trees and sky. It put things in perspective, reminded you that human concerns were just a small part of a much larger world. They stopped for a break around midday at a creek where the water ran clear and cold. Brynn dismounted and let Tracker drink while she ate some jerky and dried fruit. She was refilling her water bottles when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the forest. Hoofbeats. Someone else was on the trail. She stood quickly, one hand moving to the rifle, but relaxed when she saw who it was. A young man, maybe in his late 20s, riding a well-kept sorrel gelding. He wore the practical gear of someone who spent serious time in the backcountry. Good boots, quality rain gear tied behind his saddle, a pack that looked professionally assembled. He raised a hand in greeting as he approached. "Afternoon." "Afternoon," Brynn replied, her tone neutral. "Kyle Brennan," he said, swinging down from his horse. "I guide hunters and backpackers through this country. Don't think I've seen you on these trails before." "Brynn Halver. I keep to myself mostly." Recognition flickered across his face. "Halver, you're the woman who lives up on that old logging road. I've heard about you." "I'm sure you have." People in small towns loved to talk, and a woman living alone in the mountains made for good gossip. Kyle seemed to realize he might have overstepped. "Didn't mean anything by it. Just that folks say you know these mountains as well as anyone. That's a compliment in my line of work." Brynn softened slightly. He seemed genuine enough, and his eyes showed respect rather than judgment. "I've spent enough time up here." He glanced at Tracker, taking in the horse's age and clouded eyes. "That's an interesting choice for a backcountry trip. He seems calm, though." "He is, and he's tougher than he looks." "I don't doubt it." Kyle crouched by the creek, filling his own water bottle. "You headed far." "Just doing some exploring. This time of year you want to watch the weather. Storm systems can come through fast once we get into mid-October. I've seen it snow 6 inches overnight up in the high country. I'm prepared." Kyle stood, capping his water bottle. "I'm sure you are. But if you don't mind some unsolicited advice, there's some rough terrain about 10 miles north of here. The trail crosses a rock slide area that shifted last spring. It's passable, but it's tricky. With a horse who can't see well, you might want to lead him through on foot." Brynn appreciated the information. "I'll keep that in mind. Thank you." "No problem." He mounted his horse, then paused. "You know, if you run into any trouble up there, I've got a camp about 15 miles northeast of here. It's marked on most maps. Brennan's Meadow, they call it. Not much, just a lean-to and a fire ring. but there's good water and shelter if you need it." "That's kind of you. Just mountain courtesy." He tipped his hat. "Safe travels, Ms. Halver." She watched him ride away, disappearing around a bend in the trail. His friendliness felt genuine, but Brynn had learned long ago to be cautious about accepting help. People's motives weren't always as simple as they appeared. Still, the information about the rock slide was useful. She filed it away and continued her journey. The afternoon wore on. The trail climbed steadily, gaining elevation as it moved deeper into the wilderness. The forest changed around her, the Douglas firs giving way to lodgepole pine, the undergrowth thinning as the altitude increased. Brynn's thoughts drifted as she rode, pulled back to memories she usually kept locked away. She remembered riding through these same mountains with her father when she was young. He'd taught her to read the land, to notice the small details that told you where you were and where you were going, the way certain plants grew only at certain elevations, the patterns of game trails, and how to distinguish them from paths made by wind and water. "The land tells you everything you need to know," he used to say. "You just have to learn its language." She'd learned that language well. It was one of the few gifts from him that hadn't been tainted by his disappearance. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Brynn started looking for a place to make camp. She found a suitable spot just off the trail, a small clearing with good drainage and a fallen log that would serve as a windbreak. A stream ran nearby, barely more than a trickle but sufficient for her needs. She unsaddled Tracker and hobbled him where he could graze on the sparse grass. He seemed content, moving carefully in the limited space his hobbles allowed, using his nose to find the best patches of vegetation. Brynn set up her tent with practiced efficiency, then built a small fire. As darkness settled over the mountains, she cooked a simple meal, rice with dried vegetables, rehydrated with water from the stream. It was plain food, but after a day of riding, it tasted exactly right. She was cleaning her cooking pot when something caught her attention. Not a sound exactly, but the absence of sound. The small night noises of the forest, insects, small animals moving through the brush, had suddenly gone quiet. Brynn set the pot down slowly and picked up her rifle. She waited, listening. There. The soft scrape of something moving through the undergrowth, trying to be quiet but not quite succeeding. Too large for a deer, too deliberate for a bear. "I know you're out there," she called into the darkness. "You might as well show yourself." The movement stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Then a voice came from the darkness beyond her firelight. "Just passing through. Didn't mean to startle you. Step into the light where I can see you." A figure emerged from the trees, a man, older, maybe in his 60s, wearing trail gear that had seen better days. His face was weathered and careful, the face of someone who'd learned to be cautious. "Name's Henry Moss," he said, keeping his hands visible. "I've got a small camp about a mile from here. Saw your fire and thought I'd check who was traveling through." Brynn kept the rifle ready but not aimed. "Little late in the season for camping. Could say the same about you." His eyes flicked to Tracker. "That horse, where'd you get him?" "Bought him at auction." "Why?" Henry's expression shifted, something like recognition passing across his features. "That brand on his flank. I've seen it before, long time ago." Brynn's grip tightened on the rifle. "Where?" "Up near the old Pritchard Ranch territory. Back when I worked as a packer, taking supplies into remote camps. There was a surveyor who used to ride a horse with that brand. Dark-haired fellow, quiet type. Good with maps." "Jacob Halver," Brynn said quietly. "He was my father." Henry went very still. "I'll be damned. You're the daughter." "You knew him?" "Met him a few times. Seemed like a decent man." Heard he went missing back in the 80s. Never knew what happened to him. Brynn studied the man's face, trying to decide if he was telling the truth. What are you really doing out here, Henry? Same as you, I expect. Looking for answers, he gestured to the fire. Mind if I sit? My knees aren't what they used to be. Against her better judgment, Brynn nodded. Henry sat down on the opposite side of the fire, moving like a man who'd spent too many years sleeping on hard ground. I heard some things back in the day, he said. About your father, about what he found up in these mountains. I didn't pay much attention at the time. Wasn't my business. But lately I've been thinking about it. Thinking maybe someone should know what really happened. What did you hear? That he found something valuable on protected land. That he was planning to report it. And that some very powerful people wanted him to keep quiet. Henry poked at the fire with a stick. I saw those people once. They came through my camp, asking if I'd seen your father. I said no, even though I'd seen him just 2 days before. Something about them didn't sit right. Can you describe them? 2 men. One was older, grey hair, expensive clothes that looked wrong for the mountains. The other was younger, hard-eyed. The younger one did most of the talking. He had this way about him. Polite on the surface, but you could feel the threat underneath. What did they want to know? If your father had been through my camp, if he'd said anything about where he was going, if he'd left anything with me. Henry met her eyes across the fire. I told them I didn't know anything. They left, but I had the feeling they didn't believe me. I packed up my camp that same night and moved to a different area. Didn't come back to this part of the mountains for almost a year. Brynn absorbed this information, adding it to the growing picture of what had happened to her father. Did you ever see him again? My father? No, but about a month after those men came through, I found something. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object, holding it out to her across the fire. It was a compass, brass with a cracked glass face. Brynn took it, turning it over in her hands. On the back were initials, J.H. I found it near a stream about 5 miles from here, Henry said. Figured it belonged to your father, but I didn't know how to get it back to his family. Heard his wife had passed, and the daughter had gone off into the mountains. Kept meaning to track you down, but... He shrugged. Life got in the way. Brynn opened the compass. Despite the cracked glass, it still worked. The needle swung true, pointing north. Her father had carried this, had used it to navigate these same mountains, and now it had found its way back to his daughter. Thank you, she said quietly. This means more than you know. Henry nodded. I hope you find what you're looking for up there. Your father deserved better than what he got. They talked for a while longer, Henry sharing what little else he remembered about that time. Eventually, he stood to leave, refusing her offer to share her camp for the night. I'll sleep better in my own spot, he said. But you be careful. Those men I saw, or men like them, they might still be around. And if they figure out you're looking for your father's evidence, they won't be happy about it. After he left, Brynn sat by the fire, holding the compass. 2 artifacts now, the pocket watch and the compass. Small pieces of her father, finding their way back to her after all these years. She thought about the map in her notebook, about the location marked Last Camp. She was getting closer. Another few days of steady travel would bring her there. The fire burned down to embers, and Brynn banked it carefully before retreating to her tent. Tracker stood quietly nearby, a dark shape against the darker forest. Tomorrow they would continue north, following the trail her father had marked 4 decades ago. She fell asleep with the compass in her hand, its steady presence a comfort in the wilderness night. The morning came with frost on the ground and her breath visible in the cold air. Brynn woke to find Tracker standing near the tent, his head lowered as if he were standing guard. She'd removed his hobbles during the night, trusting that his blindness would keep him close to the familiar sounds and smells of camp. She was right. He hadn't wandered. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee, she broke camp and saddled Tracker. Her body ached from yesterday's ride. She was in good shape for 62, but long days in the saddle still took their toll. She'd feel it more tomorrow, she knew. That's how it worked at her age. The trail continued north, climbing more steeply now. They were at about 7,500 feet elevation, and the air was noticeably thinner. Tracker moved steadily, his breathing even, and Brynn was grateful for his endurance. Whatever else this horse had lost to age, he hadn't lost his heart. Around mid-morning, they reached the rockslide area Kyle Brennan had warned her about. He'd been right to mention it. The trail crossed a steep slope where a section of mountainside had given way, leaving a field of loose rock and unstable footing. Under normal circumstances, it would have been manageable on horseback. With a nearly blind horse, it was asking for trouble. Brynn dismounted and spent several minutes studying the crossing. The safest route appeared to be along the upper edge, where larger rocks had settled into more stable positions. It would add distance, but reduce the risk of Tracker losing his footing. She took the reins and began to lead him, talking to him constantly. "Easy now. We'll take it slow. Trust me, and I'll get you through." Tracker followed, placing each hoof carefully. Brynn tested every step before allowing him to follow, feeling for loose rocks and unstable ground. The crossing took nearly an hour, but they made it through without incident. On the far side, Brynn allowed herself a moment of relief. She'd been tenser than she'd realized, her shoulders tight with the effort of concentration. She remounted, and they continued, the trail leveling out somewhat as it entered a dense grove of lodgepole pine. She was thinking about stopping for lunch when she noticed something that made her pull Tracker to a halt. Just off the trail, partially hidden by undergrowth, was what appeared to be an old campsite. She dismounted to investigate. The fire ring was ancient, barely visible beneath years of accumulated pine needles and debris. But someone had camped here once, and not just for a night. There were remnants of a more permanent setup, the remains of a lean-to structure, the posts rotted and collapsed, and what might have been a small corral for horses. Brynn knelt beside the fire ring, brushing away the debris. Beneath it, she found rusted tin cans and the remains of what had once been a cooking pot. This had been a base camp of some kind, the sort of place someone would return to repeatedly. She stood and walked the perimeter of the old site, looking for anything that might identify who had used it. That's when she saw it, carved into a tree at the edge of the clearing, faint but still legible. J.H., 1985. Her father had been here. Brynn's hands shook slightly as she touched the carved letters. This was real. This was proof that she was on the right path. Her father had traveled this same route, had stopped at this same place. She began searching more carefully, looking for anything her father might have left behind. The camp had been abandoned for 40 years, and nature had been patient in its work of reclamation. But sometimes things survived. She was about to give up when she noticed something odd about one of the collapsed lean-to posts. It was hollow, and the hollow had been deliberately created. Someone had bored out the center of the post and then capped it. Brynn pulled her knife and carefully worked the cap free. Inside was a rolled piece of oilcloth protected from the weather. She pulled it out with trembling fingers and unrolled it. Inside the oilcloth was a photograph. The image was faded, but still clear enough to make out. 3 men stood in front of a building, squinting against the sun. She recognized her father immediately. He was on the left, younger than she remembered him, his dark hair not yet touched with grey. He was smiling, one hand resting on the shoulder of the man beside him. She didn't recognize the middle man, but the one on the right looked familiar. It took her a moment to place him. It was Owen Pritchard, 40 years younger but still recognizable. Brynn turned the photograph over. On the back, in her father's handwriting, "Last day at the ranch. Owen, me, and R. Voss. May 1985. R. Voss, Raymond Voss, the fixer Owen had mentioned, the man who made problems disappear." Brynn studied the photograph more closely. Voss was younger than the other 2 men, maybe in his 30s. He had dark hair and a lean build, and while he was smiling for the camera, there was something cold in his eyes, even in the old photograph. This was the man who had likely killed her father, and he'd stood next to him, smiled with him, pretended to be his colleague while planning his murder. She felt rage building in her chest, hot and immediate. But she forced it down. Anger wouldn't help her now. She needed to stay focused, stay smart. She examined the photograph one more time, then carefully wrapped it back in the oilcloth and placed it in her saddlebag. This was evidence, not just of her father's presence here, but of his connection to the men who'd betrayed him. The sun was past its zenith now, and Brynn knew she needed to keep moving if she wanted to make decent progress. She mounted Tracker and continued north, but her mind was churning with questions. Why had her father hidden this photograph here? Had he known he was in danger and wanted to leave a trail? Or was this just a waypoint, one of many places where he'd left information? The trail wound through the forest for another hour, before opening onto a ridge that offered a spectacular view of the valley below. Brynn stopped to let Tracker rest and to check her position on the map. According to her calculations, she was about halfway to the location marked Last Camp. At this pace, she'd reach it in 2, maybe 3 more days. She was studying the map when she heard a sound that didn't belong, the distant throb of an engine. A helicopter by the sound of it, and getting closer. Brynn quickly dismounted and led Tracker into the tree cover at the edge of the clearing. She watched as the helicopter came into view, flying low over the valley. It was unmarked, a civilian aircraft, but something about its pattern of flight seemed deliberate. It was searching for something, or someone. The helicopter made a wide circle over the area, then moved off to the west. Brynn waited several minutes after the sound faded before emerging from the trees. Her instincts were screaming at her now. Someone knew she was out here. Someone was looking for her. She thought about Sheriff Coulter's warning, about Owen's fear, about Henry Moss's story of the men who'd come looking for her father. The past wasn't as dead as she'd hoped. It was very much alive, and it knew she was coming. Brynn made a decision. She'd continue to the last camp location, but she'd be more careful. No more fires at night. She'd eat cold meals and sleep in darkness. She'd stay off the main trails when possible, taking the harder routes that would be less obvious. If someone wanted to find her, she wouldn't make it easy. She rode until dusk, then made a cold camp in a dense thicket of spruce trees. She tended to Tracker, giving him grain and making sure he had water, then settled into her sleeping bag without bothering to set up the tent. The stars were brilliant overhead, unmarred by any light pollution. She lay there thinking about the photograph, about her father standing next to the man who would kill him. Had he suspected? Had he known and chosen to hide the evidence rather than run? Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it was filled with uneasy dreams. The next day brought clouds and the smell of coming snow. Brynn pushed Tracker hard, knowing that if a storm hit, they'd need to find shelter. The trail climbed steadily, entering alpine terrain where the trees grew sparse and twisted by constant wind. She was navigating a narrow path along a cliff face when she saw it, fresh boot prints in a muddy section of trail. Someone else had been here recently, within the last day or two. Brynn dismounted and examined the prints carefully. They were large, likely a man's size 11 or 12. The tread pattern was distinct, expensive hiking boots, not the cheap kind you could buy at any sporting goods store. The prints headed in the same direction she was traveling, north toward the last camp. She remounted and continued, every sense alert. The compass her father had carried was in her jacket pocket, and she touched it frequently, drawing some comfort from its presence. As afternoon faded toward evening, snow began to fall, light at first, then heavier. Brynn knew she needed to find shelter soon. She was scanning the landscape for options when she spotted a structure ahead, a small cabin, weathered and tilted, but still standing. She approached cautiously. The cabin was old, probably a herder's shelter from decades past. The door hung crooked on broken hinges, and snow had drifted in through gaps in the walls. But it was shelter, and shelter was what she needed. Brynn led Tracker to the lee side of the cabin, where an overhang provided some protection from the falling snow. She unsaddled him and rubbed him down with her saddle blanket, then covered him with the spare blanket she'd brought. Inside the cabin, she found a corner that was relatively dry and set up her sleeping bag. The wind howled outside, and snow fell steadily. She ate jerky and dried fruit, wishing for hot coffee, but not willing to risk a fire. As darkness fell, she took out her mother's journal and read by flashlight, looking for anything she might have missed. One entry caught her attention, written just a week after her father disappeared. A man came by today. He said he was from the ranch, checking to see if Jacob had come home. But I've never seen him at the ranch before. He had cold eyes. He asked about Jacob's papers, his maps. I told him Jacob took everything with him when he left. He didn't believe me. I could see it in his face. After he left, I hid everything. The maps, the journal Jacob kept, all of it. I won't let them have it. Whatever Jacob found, whatever he knew, I'll keep it safe until it can be told. Brynn closed the journal, understanding blooming in her chest. Her mother had hidden the evidence. That's why it had taken years for Brynn to find the map and the survey notes. Grace had scattered the pieces, kept them separate and secret, protecting them until someone, her daughter, was ready to put them together. The snow fell all night, and Brynn slept fitfully, waking often to check on Tracker and to listen to the wind. By morning, 6 inches had accumulated, turning the world outside into a pristine white landscape. She made a quick breakfast and prepared to continue. The snow would make the trail harder to follow, but it would also cover her tracks. A fair trade. As she saddled Tracker, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Fresh boot prints in the snow, leading to the cabin. Someone had approached during the night while she slept. They'd stood outside, just feet from where she lay, and then they'd walked away. Brynn checked her rifle, made sure it was loaded and ready. Whoever was out here, they knew where she was. The question was what they planned to do about it. She mounted Tracker and turned him north, toward the last camp and whatever waited there. Behind her, the boot prints in the snow slowly filled with fresh fall, erasing the evidence of the watcher who'd come in the night. The snow stopped by mid-morning, leaving the high country transformed into something both beautiful and treacherous. Brynn guided Tracker carefully along the trail, which was now barely visible beneath the white blanket. Navigation required constant reference to her compass and the landmarks she'd memorized from the map. The knowledge that someone had watched her sleep gnawed at her thoughts. If they'd meant to hurt her, they could have done it while she was vulnerable in the cabin. The fact that they hadn't suggested either they wanted something from her first, or they were waiting for her to lead them somewhere, to the last camp, to her father's evidence. She'd been riding for about 2 hours when she spotted a building ahead, a more substantial structure than the herder's cabin. As she drew closer, she recognized it as the old Pritchard Line shack, a small ranch outpost that had been used decades ago when the ranch ran cattle in the high country summer pastures. Smoke rose from the chimney. Brynn brought Tracker to a stop, her hand moving to the rifle. Someone was inside, and they were comfortable enough to have built a fire. She considered her options. She could try to circle around, avoid whoever was there. But the trail she needed to follow ran right past the line shack, and detouring would cost her precious time. Before she could decide, the door opened. A man stepped out, and Brynn recognized him immediately. Owen Pritchard. He was bundled in a heavy coat, leaning heavily on his cane. He raised one hand in greeting, and Brynn could see the exhaustion in every line of his body. She rode closer, confusion warring with caution. "What are you doing up here? Your wife said your heart couldn't handle this altitude." "Linda doesn't know I'm here," Owen said. "She thinks I'm in town seeing my doctor. I'll pay for it later. My chest already feels like there's an elephant sitting on it. But I needed to talk to you before you reached the last camp." Brynn dismounted, tying Tracker's reins to the porch rail. "You could have told me whatever this is back at your ranch." "No, I couldn't. Not everything." He gestured toward the door. "Come inside. I've got coffee on, and you look half frozen." The interior of the line shack was basic, but functional. A wood stove provided heat, and there was a bunk, a small table, and shelves stocked with old canned goods. Owen had clearly arrived ahead of her. His pack sat in the corner, and the coffee pot on the stove was nearly full. He poured 2 cups and handed one to Brynn. "I lied to you," he said, without preamble. "Back at the ranch, I told you I gave you all of your father's survey notes, but I kept something back. Why? Because I was still afraid. Even at my age, even dying, I was afraid." He pulled a silver pocket watch from his pocket, identical to the one Linda had given Brynn. "But then I got to thinking about your father, about what he would do. Jacob never let fear stop him from doing what was right. He'd be ashamed of me." Owen opened the pocket watch. Inside, where the mechanism should be, was a hollow space. He worked at it with his thumbnail, and a false back popped open. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. He handed it to Brynn. "Your father gave this to me the last time I saw him. He said if anything happened to him, I should give it to someone who could do something with it. I was too much of a coward. But you're not." Brynn unfolded the paper carefully. It was a page from her father's field notebook, covered in his handwriting. Coordinates, dates, and a detailed description of what he'd found. An extensive mining operation on protected federal land, complete with the names of the companies involved and the government officials who'd been bribed to look the other way. "Halstead Mining Corporation," she read aloud. "Payment to Interior Department Inspector, $50,000. Payment to BLM District Manager, $75,000. Estimated value of minerals extracted, $12 million over 2-year period." "That's just the summary," Owen said. "Your father had documentation, photographs, survey records, samples. He told me he was going to hide it all where no one would think to look, and then he was going to contact a federal investigator he trusted, someone outside the local chain of command. He never got the chance. No, they killed him before he could." Owen's voice broke slightly. "I saw Raymond Voss 2 days after your father disappeared. He came to my ranch, asked me the same questions he'd asked everyone else. But he looked different. satisfied, like he'd accomplished something difficult. I knew right then that your father was dead, and I knew who'd killed him. Why didn't you go to the authorities? I did. I went to the sheriff. Not Ben Coulter. This was before his time. The sheriff told me I was imagining things, that there was no evidence of foul play. He suggested I keep my speculations to myself unless I wanted to be sued for slander. Owen's hands shook as he set down his coffee cup. I was a coward, Brynn. I let them get away with murder because I was afraid they'd come after me next. Brynn studied the paper in her hands, her mind working through the implications. This is 40 years old. The statute of limitations on most of these crimes has run out. Murder doesn't have a statute of limitations, and if your father's evidence is still where he hid it, you can prove he was killed for what he knew. That makes it not just corruption, but conspiracy to commit murder. The companies involved could still face charges. The individuals involved could go to prison. You said you saw Voss recently? I didn't see him, but I heard about him. He's still alive, still working for mining interests. He's in his 70s now, but he's still cleaning up problems, still making people disappear when necessary. Owen met her eyes. If he finds out you're looking for your father's evidence, he'll come for you, just like he came for Jacob. Brynn folded the paper and put it in her jacket pocket next to her father's compass. Let him come. You don't understand what kind of man he is. He's not some thug you can outshoot in a fair fight. He's patient, methodical. He'll wait for the right moment. And then you'll just— Owen snapped his fingers. Vanish. My father didn't vanish. Someone knows what happened to him. Voss knows. But he'll never tell. He's been doing this too long, and he's too good at it. Owen leaned forward, his breathing labored. I came up here to give you that paper and to beg you to be smart about this. Get to the last camp. Get your father's evidence if it's still there. But then don't try to be a hero. Take it straight to federal authorities, the FBI, the EPA, someone with the power to act. Don't confront these people yourself. I'm not planning to confront anyone. I just want the truth. The truth got your father killed. Then I'll be more careful than he was. Owen shook his head, but he seemed to accept that he couldn't change her mind. There's something else you should know. The last camp, it's on what used to be Halstead mining land. They sold it years ago when they restructured, but the current owner is one of their subsidiaries. Technically, you'll be trespassing. I don't care about technically. You should, because it gives them a legal excuse to have you removed. Or worse. He pulled a map from his pack and spread it on the table. Here's what I know about the area. Your father's mark is here, in this alpine basin. There's a small lake, good water, and a stand of old-growth spruce. It's about 8 miles from here, but the trail is rough. With snow on the ground and that old horse, it'll take you the better part of a day. Brynn studied the map, committing the details to memory. Is there another way in? There's an old mining road that comes in from the east, but it's been closed for 20 years. You'd need a 4-wheel drive to get anywhere near it, and even then you'd have to hike the last few miles. On horseback from here is your best bet. All right. Owen pulled something else from his pack, a satellite phone. Take this. It's already programmed with my number and Sheriff Coulter's. If you get in trouble, call. We'll come for you. Brynn hesitated, then took the phone. She wasn't accustomed to accepting help, but she wasn't foolish enough to turn down a potentially life-saving tool. Thank you. Don't thank me. I should have done right by your father 40 years ago. This is the least I can do now. He stood slowly, wincing with the effort. I need to get back down the mountain before Linda sends a search party. My truck's parked at the trailhead, about 3 miles south of here. You rode up here alone, at your age, with a bad heart. I borrowed a horse from my neighbor. It knows the way home. He managed a weak smile. One last ride in the high country seemed fitting. Brynn walked outside with him, watching as he mounted the horse tied on the far side of the line shack. He looked old and fragile in the saddle, but there was something resolved in his expression. "Owen," she called, as he was about to ride away. "Did my father ever tell you he loved this country? The mountains, I mean. Every time we worked together, he said it was in his blood, that he couldn't imagine living anywhere else." Owen's voice softened. "He would have been proud of you, Brynn. Proud that you didn't let fear stop you from finding the truth." He rode away, and Brynn watched until he disappeared around a bend in the trail. Then she went back inside to warm up before continuing her journey. She spent an hour studying Owen's map and comparing it to her own notes. The last camp was close now, closer than she'd realized. If she pushed hard, she could reach it by nightfall. But traveling in the dark was dangerous, especially with Tracker's limited vision. Better to make a cold camp tonight and arrive at the last camp in full daylight tomorrow. She was repacking her gear when she heard it. The sound of an engine, distant but approaching. Not a helicopter this time. A snowmobile. Brynn moved to the window and watched as a snowmobile came into view, moving fast along the trail. The rider wore a dark helmet and cold weather gear, and there was something professional about the way they handled the machine. The snowmobile slowed as it approached the line shack, then stopped. The rider killed the engine and removed their helmet. It was a woman, probably in her late 40s, with short grey hair and sharp features. She looked at the line shack, then at Tracker tied to the porch rail, and smiled. She walked to the door and knocked. Brynn opened it, her rifle held casually but ready. "Ms. Halver," the woman said. Her voice was pleasant, professional. "My name is Sandra Kincaid. I'm an investigator with the Environmental Protection Agency. I need to talk to you about your father." Brynn didn't lower the rifle. "How do you know who I am?" "Sheriff Coulter called our office 3 days ago. He said Jacob Halver's daughter was looking for evidence related to illegal mining operations from the 1980s. Sandra Kincaid pulled out credentials, holding them up for Brynn to see. "I've been working on legacy mining cases for 15 years. Your father's name has come up before." "Come up how?" "May I come inside? It's cold out here, and this conversation might take a while." Brynn stepped aside, keeping the woman in her line of sight. Sandra entered and immediately moved to the stove, warming her hands. Her movements were easy, unthreatening, but Brynn remained cautious. "Your father filed a report with the EPA in April 1985, Sandra said. "It detailed extensive illegal mining operations on protected federal land. The report was thorough, professional, exactly the kind of documentation we needed to build a case. But before we could act on it, your father disappeared. The local investigation concluded he'd left voluntarily, and without him to testify, we couldn't proceed. Someone killed him to keep him quiet. That was our suspicion. But we had no proof, no body, no evidence beyond circumstantial." Sandra pulled a folder from her jacket. "I've spent years trying to find the original documentation your father referenced in his report. He mentioned photographs, mineral samples, detailed survey maps. We never found any of it. The EPA office assumed it was lost or destroyed. But you don't think so. I think your father was smart enough to hide it, and I think you're looking for the same thing I am." Sandra opened the folder, revealing copies of official documents. The companies involved in the illegal mining operations, Halstead Mining was the primary contractor, but there were others. Between 1983 and 1985, they extracted an estimated $20 million in minerals from protected land. They paid off inspectors, falsified reports, and when your father threatened to expose them, they eliminated the threat. Brynn examined the documents. They corroborated everything Owen had told her, everything her father's notes had indicated. Why should I trust you? You shouldn't. Not completely. But consider this. I've been tracking these companies for 15 years. I've built cases against them for environmental violations, fraud, bribery. I've put executives in prison. Your father's case is the one that got away, and I want to close it. What do you want from me? To work together. You're looking for your father's evidence. I can help you, and in return, when we find it, I can ensure it's used properly, that the people responsible actually face justice. Brynn was quiet, thinking it through. She'd spent her adult life being self-reliant, not trusting easily. But Sandra's story had the ring of truth, and if she was really from the EPA, having federal backing could make the difference between success and ending up like her father. How did you find me up here? Brynn asked. Sheriff Coulter told me you'd headed into the back country. I've been searching for 2 days. Your campfire last night led me in the right direction, and then I spotted the horse tracks this morning. Sandra gestured toward Tracker. That's a distinctive horse, hard to miss. I didn't have a campfire last night. Sandra's expression changed, becoming more alert. You didn't? No. I made a cold camp because I knew someone was looking for me. Brynn moved to the window, scanning the tree line. If you saw smoke, someone else is up here. Damn. Sandra pulled out her own phone, a satellite model similar to the one Owen had given Brynn. I need to call my partner. He's at the trailhead with our vehicle. Brynn listened as Sandra made the call, explaining the situation. When she hung up, her face was grim. My partner says 2 men arrived at the trailhead this morning in a private helicopter. They're on snowmobiles now, headed this direction. He tried to ask them who they were, but they weren't interested in conversation. How far away? Maybe an hour, based on when they left. Brynn made a decision. We need to move. I'm close to the location I'm looking for. If we can get there first, we might have time to find what we need and get out. I'll help you. My snowmobile can carry supplies, make the trip faster. No. Brynn's voice was firm. If these are the people I think they are, being with me puts you in danger. You should head back down the mountain, bring in backup. By the time backup gets here, you could be dead. Sandra's eyes were steady. I didn't come all this way to turn back now. Besides, I'm armed and trained. I can help. Brynn studied the woman's face, looking for any sign of deception. She found none, only determination and what looked like genuine concern. All right, Brynn said finally. But we do this my way. I know this country, and I know how to move through it quietly. You follow my lead. Agreed. They worked quickly, gathering gear and preparing to move. Sandra's snowmobile had a small cargo area, and they loaded it with essentials. Brynn saddled Tracker, moving with practiced efficiency. As they were about to leave, Brynn noticed something on the table, a page from Owen's notes that she'd left behind. She picked it up and was about to put it in her pocket when she saw writing on the back that she hadn't noticed before. It was a list of names. Not just Raymond Voss, but others. Government officials, company executives, all involved in the conspiracy that had killed her father. And at the bottom of the list, in her father's handwriting, trust no one, they have people everywhere. Brynn showed it to Sandra. Does that include federal agencies? Sandra's jaw tightened. The EPA officials named in your father's original report were fired or prosecuted, But that was 40 years ago. The agency has changed. But the companies haven't, and their methods haven't. Brynn folded the paper and put it away. I'm trusting you because I don't have better options. But if you're not who you say you are, I'll know, and I won't hesitate. Fair enough. They left the line shack, Brynn on tracker and Sandra on the snowmobile, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. The snow was deeper here, making travel difficult, but Tracker proved remarkably sure-footed. His blindness, which seemed like such a liability, actually helped. He was accustomed to navigating by feel and sound rather than sight, and the snow didn't disorient him the way it might a sighted horse. Sandra followed on the snowmobile, keeping the engine as quiet as possible. They'd agreed to maintain radio silence, unless absolutely necessary, communicating with hand signals when needed. The trail climbed steadily, entering a region of stunted trees and exposed rock. The wind picked up, blowing snow in horizontal sheets that stung Brynn's face. She pulled her scarf higher and kept moving. After an hour of hard travel, they reached a ridge that offered a view of the basin below. Brynn dismounted and pulled out her binoculars, scanning the landscape. There it was, the alpine lake Owen had described, its surface frozen and covered with snow, and near the far shore, a stand of old-growth spruce, their dark branches heavy with white. The last camp. That's it, Brynn said, pointing. That's where my father hid the evidence. Sandra came to stand beside her, looking down at the basin. It's exposed. If those men come over the ridge, they'll see us immediately. Then we need to get down there fast, find what we need, and get out. Brynn studied the route down. It was steep, but navigable. Leave the snowmobile here. It's too loud, and we'll need the element of surprise if things go wrong. What's the plan? We go to the grove, search the area systematically. My father was a surveyor. He would have chosen a location that was both memorable and defensible, probably near a landmark of some kind. They descended into the basin, moving as quickly as they dared. The wind covered the sound of their passage, but it also made conditions miserable. Brynn's face was numb, her fingers stiff even inside her gloves. It took 30 minutes to reach the grove of spruce trees. Up close, they were even more impressive. Ancient trees, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches creating a canopy that had sheltered this spot for centuries. Brynn dismounted and tied Tracker to a tree, then began searching the area. Sandra worked nearby, moving in a grid pattern, looking for anything out of place. What exactly are we looking for? Sandra called. I don't know. Something hidden but retrievable. My father would have marked it somehow. They searched for 20 minutes with no success. The grove covered maybe half an acre, and every tree looked the same. Every rock was buried under snow. Brynn was starting to worry they'd made a mistake when she noticed something odd. One of the spruce trees had a blaze mark on it, a section of bark removed, though the scar had mostly healed over. Blazes were used to mark property lines or trails, but this one was unusual. It was too high, at about eye level rather than chest height, where such marks were normally placed. She approached the tree and brushed snow away from the blaze. Carved into the wood beneath, barely visible, were initials. J.H. Here, she called to Sandra. This is it. They examined the tree carefully. The trunk was hollow at the base, the opening concealed by years of growth and accumulated debris. Brynn knelt and began clearing away the snow and dead branches. Inside the hollow was a metal box, the kind used to store documents. It was rusted but intact, sealed with what looked like wax to keep out moisture. Brynn's hands shook as she pulled it out. This was it. 40 years of questions, 40 years of wondering, all contained in this single box. She was about to open it when Sandra grabbed her arm. "Wait. Listen." In the distance, over the sound of the wind, came the high-pitched whine of snowmobile engines, multiple engines. "They found us," Sandra said. Brynn looked at the box in her hands, then at the ridge where they'd come down. She could see movement up there. 3 snowmobiles, maybe more, descending into the basin. "We need to run," Sandra said. "Now." "No." Brynn's voice was calm. "They'll catch us on open ground. We make our stand here, in the trees. Better cover, better defensive position." Sandra pulled a pistol from inside her jacket. "I hope you're a good shot." "Good enough." Brynn checked her rifle, making sure a round was chambered. "Stay behind the trees. Don't expose yourself unless you have a clear target. And whatever happens, this box gets out." That's the priority. The snowmobiles were closer now, spreading out as they approached the grove. Brynn counted 4 of them, 2 riders on each, 8 people, all armed. The odds weren't good. But then again, they never had been. Brynn found a position behind a thick spruce trunk, the metal box tucked safely beside her. Tracker stood nearby, remarkably calm for a horse surrounded by approaching danger. The snowmobiles stopped just outside the grove. The riders dismounted, taking defensive positions behind their machines. A voice called out, carrying across the snow, "Ms. Halver, there's no need for this to get ugly. We just want the box. Give it to us, and you can walk away." Brynn recognized the voice from somewhere, though she couldn't place it. "Who are you?" "Someone who's been cleaning up messes for a very long time. Your father created a mess 40 years ago. I dealt with it then, and I'll deal with it now if I have to. But I'd rather not. I'm an old man, Ms. Halver. Killing doesn't excite me anymore." Raymond Voss. "It had to be." "You killed my father," Brynn called back. "I did what I was paid to do. Nothing personal. He was in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with information that belonged to other people. The information belonged to the American people. He was trying to expose criminals. He was naive. The world doesn't work the way he thought it did. Power protects power. Money protects money. That's just reality." Voss's tone was almost conversational. "You have 1 minute to slide that box, out where we can see it. If you do, you and your friend can ride out of here. If you don't, well, accidents happen in the mountains all the time." Brynn looked at Sandra, who shook her head firmly. "Don't give it to them." "I wasn't planning to." Brynn raised her voice. "You want it? Come and take it." There was a long pause. Then Voss sighed, the sound carrying in the cold air. "Such a waste. You're just like your father. Too stubborn to know when you're beaten." "I learned from the best." "Yes," Voss said quietly. "I suppose you did." The shooting started a moment later. Bullets tore through the spruce branches, sending bark and splinters flying. Brynn ducked behind the thick trunk, her heart hammering. Beside her, Sandra returned fire with her pistol, forcing one of the attackers to retreat behind his snowmobile. "We can't hold them off for long," Sandra shouted over the gunfire. "There's too many of them." Brynn knew she was right. They had defensive positions, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Sooner or later, Voss's people would flank them or simply wait them out. She fired 3 careful shots, aiming for the snowmobile's fuel tanks. The 3rd shot hit home, and one of the machines erupted in flames. The riders scattered, giving Brynn and Sandra a momentary advantage. "We need to move deeper into the grove," Brynn said. "Make them come to us where their numbers don't matter as much." They fell back, using the trees for cover. Tracker followed, remarkably calm despite the chaos. Brynn grabbed his reins and led him deeper into the forest, where the ancient spruces grew so close together that the snowmobiles couldn't follow. The shooting stopped as Voss's people regrouped. Brynn used the pause to check the metal box. It was still intact, still sealed. Whatever was inside had survived 40 years of weather and was about to survive a firefight. "They'll come on foot now," Sandra said. "Hunt us through the trees." "Let them. I know how to make people regret following me into the woods." Brynn pulled out the topographical map. "There's a creek bed about a quarter-mile east of here. Deep enough to provide cover, with high banks on both sides. If we can reach it, we can use it to get out of the basin. Can your horse make it through this terrain?" "He'll have to." They moved as quietly as possible, working their way east. Behind them, Brynn could hear voices. Voss's people coordinating their search. They were professionals, moving in a tactical pattern, covering each other's movements. But Brynn had grown up in these mountains. She knew how to read the land, how to find the invisible paths that only locals knew existed. She led Sandra and Tracker through a narrow gap between two rock formations, then down a steep slope that would be nearly impossible to track in the snow. They'd gone maybe 200 yards when Brynn heard something that made her stop. Not gunfire or voices, but the sound of a helicopter. It came in low over the ridge, a civilian model painted in Forest Service colors. For a moment, Brynn thought it might be help. Maybe Sheriff Coulter had sent a search and rescue team. But then she saw the door gunner, saw the weapon mounted on the helicopter's side, and knew they were in even more trouble than she'd thought. "Run!" she shouted to Sandra. They plunged down the slope, sliding and stumbling in the deep snow. Tracker followed with surprising agility, his hooves finding purchase where Brynn's boots slipped. Behind them, the helicopter's engine grew louder. The creek bed appeared suddenly, a deep cut in the landscape, its banks steep and lined with ice. Brynn didn't hesitate. She jumped, sliding down the frozen bank and landing hard in the snow-filled stream bed below. Sandra followed, and Tracker came after, half sliding, half falling down the slope. Above them, the helicopter passed over, searching. The creek bed's high banks and overhanging vegetation provided cover, making them invisible from the air. They moved along the creek bed, staying low. The going was difficult. The snow was waist-deep in places, and the ice-covered rocks were treacherous. But it was better than being caught in the open. After 10 minutes of hard travel, they reached a point where the creek passed under a rock overhang, creating a small cave-like space. Brynn led them inside, grateful for the shelter. "We can't stay here long," Sandra said, her breath coming in harsh gasps. "They'll find our tracks eventually." "I know, but I need a minute to think." Brynn pulled out the metal box and examined it more carefully. The wax seal was old, but still intact. She worked at it with her knife, carefully breaking it away. Inside the box were several items, all wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture. Brynn unwrapped them one by one. First, a stack of photographs. They showed the illegal mining operation in detail: equipment, personnel, trucks hauling minerals. Each photo was labeled with dates and GPS coordinates. Second, mineral samples in labeled bags, physical evidence of what had been extracted from protected land. Third, a thick folder of documents, survey reports, falsified permits, records of payments to corrupt officials. Everything meticulously documented in her father's precise handwriting. And fourth, at the bottom of the box, a letter addressed to her. Brynn's hands trembled as she unfolded it. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but the words were clear. "Dear Brynn, if you're reading this, then I didn't make it out of the mountains, and you've spent years wondering what happened to your father. I'm sorry for that. Sorrier than I can say. I've hidden this evidence because I believe the truth matters more than my safety. The people I'm about to expose are powerful and ruthless. They've already threatened your mother, and I know they'll come for me." But I can't stay silent. Too much is at stake. Our public lands, our natural resources, the integrity of the institutions that are supposed to protect them. By the time you find this, you'll probably think I abandoned you. Your mother will have told you I left, because I made her promise to say that. It's not true. I would never leave you, sweetheart. You and your mother are the best parts of my life. But I need you to understand something important. Your mother knew where this evidence was hidden. She always knew. I told her before I made this last trip. I marked the location on a map and gave it to her. I said if anything happened to me, she should wait. Wait until the danger had passed. Wait until you were old enough and strong enough to finish what I started. And then she should give you the map. She's protecting you, Brynn, by staying silent, by telling everyone I left. She's keeping you safe from the people who killed me. Don't be angry with her for the lies. Every lie was an act of love. I know you'll be strong enough to handle this. You have your mother's courage and my stubborn determination. Use this evidence to bring these criminals to justice. But be smart. Don't confront them directly. Take it to federal authorities you can trust. Make sure it can't be buried or destroyed. I'm proud of you, daughter. I've always been proud of you. And I'm sorry I won't be there to watch you become the remarkable woman I know you will be. Love always. Dad P.S. That old compass I carried? I left it at my base camp, about 5 miles south of this location. If you found it, good. You're following my trail exactly as I hoped you would. Brynn's vision blurred with tears. She'd been so angry at her mother for so many years, believing Grace had been complicit in her father's abandonment. But her mother had been protecting her all along, carrying the weight of truth and silence for 4 decades. Brynn? Sandra's voice was gentle. Are you okay? My mother knew. Brynn's voice was thick. She knew where this was the whole time. She could have come here herself, could have exposed everything, but she didn't. Because she was protecting you. Yes. Brynn wiped her eyes. She waited until she knew I was ready, until I was strong enough to handle the truth and smart enough to survive it. She thought about the journal, about the entries she'd read. He found something he shouldn't have. They know. That wasn't just observation. It was warning. Grace had been documenting the danger, leaving a trail for Brynn to follow, but only when the time was right. The map had been hidden in the lining of a suitcase, found only after Grace died. Because Grace had known that as long as she was alive, she could keep Brynn from this dangerous quest. But once she was gone, Brynn would need answers, would need closure. It was the final act of a mother's love, giving her daughter the truth, but only when she could no longer be there to suffer the consequences of it. Sandra was quiet, letting Brynn process. After a moment, she said, Your mother sounds like an extraordinary woman. She was. Brynn carefully repacked the evidence, sealing it back in the metal box. And I'm going to finish what my father started, for both of them. Outside their shelter, they could hear voices. Voss's people were searching the area, getting closer. The helicopter made another pass overhead. We need a plan, Sandra said. We can't outrun them, and we can't fight them all off. Brynn thought about her father's letter, about his instruction to take the evidence to federal authorities. Can you get this out? She asked Sandra. If I create a distraction, can you get to your snowmobile and get this evidence to safety? What kind of distraction? The kind that makes them chase me instead of you? Absolutely not. I'm not letting you sacrifice yourself. It's not a sacrifice. I know these mountains better than anyone. If I can lead them away from here, into terrain where their numbers don't matter, I can lose them. Or at least slow them down long enough for you to get clear. Brynn pulled out the satellite phone Owen had given her. Once you're safe, you call Sheriff Coulter. You tell him to bring every federal agent he can find. You show them this evidence, and you make damn sure it gets used properly. Brynn, this is what my father wanted. This is what my mother protected for 40 years. I'm not letting it end here, buried in the snow with both of us dead. Brynn's voice was firm. You're the EPA investigator. You know how to handle evidence, how to build a case. I'm just a mountain woman with a stubborn streak. Let me do what I do best. Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. All right. But you call me the second you're safe. And if you die out here, I'll be pissed. Despite everything, Brynn smiled. Noted. They worked out the details quickly. Sandra would head back the way they'd come, using the creek bed for cover as long as possible. Once she reached the area where they'd left the snowmobile, she'd make a run for it. Brynn would go the opposite direction, making as much noise as possible, drawing attention. Tracker would stay with her. His distinctive appearance would make it clear who Voss's people should follow. One more thing, Sandra said. She pulled a small recording device from her pocket. I've been recording everything since we met at the line shack. Every word Voss said, every shot fired. It's all documented. Even if something happens to the physical evidence, we have this. Brynn took the recorder and added it to the metal box. Keep it safe. They moved to the edge of their shelter. Sandra went first, slipping out and heading upstream. Brynn watched until she disappeared around a bend, then turned to Tracker. Just you and me now, friend. Think you can keep up with an old woman making bad decisions? Tracker's ears swiveled toward her voice, and she chose to interpret that as a yes. She mounted and urged him out of the shelter, immediately turning downstream and making as much noise as possible. She fired her rifle into the air, the shots echoing off the rock walls. Within seconds, she heard shouts. The helicopter swung around, coming back toward her position. Brynn urged Tracker into a gallop, racing down the creek bed. The snow made the going treacherous, but Tracker seemed to understand the urgency. He ran with surprising speed, his hooves finding purchase on the ice-covered rocks. Behind her, she could hear snowmobiles. They'd found a way down into the creek bed, but the terrain favored a horse over machines here, and Tracker's blindness meant he trusted his footing rather than second-guessing it. She led them on a chase through the wilderness, using every trick she knew to slow her pursuers. She took paths that were too narrow for snowmobiles, forced them to dismount and follow on foot. She crossed and recrossed the creek, making her trail confusing. The helicopter stayed with her, but it couldn't land in the dense forest, couldn't do more than track her from above. Brynn checked her watch. She'd been running for 30 minutes. That should be enough time for Sandra to reach the snowmobile and get clear. Now she just had to survive long enough to see if her gambit had worked. She emerged from the creek bed into a meadow, and that's when she saw them. 3 men on foot, cutting off her escape route. They must have anticipated her path, gotten ahead of her. One of them was older, moving with the careful precision of someone who'd been doing this kind of work for decades. Raymond Voss, finally showing himself. Brynn brought Tracker to a stop, her rifle ready. She was surrounded. Men behind her in the creek bed, men ahead in the meadow, and the helicopter circling overhead. Voss walked forward, hands visible and empty. Impressive chase, Miss Halver. Your father would be proud. But it's over now. Where's the evidence? Brynn said nothing. Your friend, the EPA agent, she has it, doesn't she? Voss smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Smart, I'll give you credit for that. But my people have already intercepted her. She won't get far. You're lying. Am I? He pulled out a radio and spoke into it. Status on the federal agent? Static, then a voice. No sign of her yet. Still searching. Voss's smile faded. He looked at Brynn with something approaching respect. She got away. She did. And by now, she's contacted the authorities. Your operation here is over. Maybe. But you're not walking out of these mountains. He gestured to his men. Take her. Brynn raised her rifle, but before she could fire, a shot rang out from the tree line. One of Voss's men went down, clutching his leg. More shots followed, and suddenly the meadow was chaos. Voss and his remaining men scattered, taking cover. Brynn wheeled Tracker around, trying to see who was shooting. Through the trees, she glimpsed figures, multiple people, moving with tactical precision. A voice boomed across the meadow, amplified by a bullhorn. "Federal agents! Drop your weapons and get on the ground!" Sheriff Coulter emerged from the tree line, followed by a dozen agents in FBI tactical gear. Behind them came more law enforcement, state police, more federal agents, even a few local deputies. Sandra had made it out, and she'd brought the cavalry. Voss's people were quickly surrounded and disarmed. The man himself stood slowly, his hands raised, his expression resigned. Sheriff Coulter approached Brynn, his weathered face showing relief. "You all right?" "I'm alive." She dismounted, her legs shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "Sandra?" "Safe. She's with the FBI at the command post. She has your father's evidence." He looked at Voss, now in handcuffs. "We've got him, Brynn. After 40 years, we finally got him." Brynn walked over to where Voss stood. Up close, she could see he was old. In his 70s, his face lined and weathered. He'd spent his life making problems disappear, and now he was about to pay for all of it. "You said my father was naive," Brynn said quietly. "That he didn't understand how the world worked. He didn't. You're wrong. He understood perfectly. He just believed it could be better. That people could be better." She looked him in the eyes. And he was right. It took 40 years. But the truth came out. Justice came. You lost. Voss said nothing as they led him away. Brynn stood in the meadow, watching as the sun broke through the clouds for the first time that day. Tracker stood beside her, patient and steady, the horse that had started this whole journey. Sheriff Coulter approached again. "There's something you should know. Sandra found something else in the evidence box. A final note from your father." He handed her a small piece of paper, separate from the letter she'd already read. It was dated the day before her father disappeared. "If I don't come back, tell Brynn I love her. Tell her the mountains are in her blood, and she'll always find her way home." Brynn folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket, next to the compass and the watch. She'd found the truth. She'd found justice. And in the process, she'd found her way home. The FBI established a command post at the line shack, transforming the rustic shelter into a hub of federal activity. Brynn sat outside on the porch, wrapped in a thermal blanket someone had given her, watching as agents processed the scene and documented everything that had happened. Sandra emerged from inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Brynn and sat down beside her. "How are you holding up?" Sandra asked. "Still processing." Brynn took a sip of the coffee. It was terrible, but it was hot. "Is the evidence secure?" "Locked in a federal evidence transport. It's already on its way to Denver, where our forensics team will catalog everything. Your father's documentation is pristine, Brynn. Photographs, mineral samples, financial records. It's enough to build cases against a dozen different entities." "And Voss?" "In custody. He's not talking yet. But he will. Men like him always do when they realize they're facing the rest of their lives in prison. Sandra paused. There's something else. When we searched his belongings, we found a journal. He's been documenting his work for 50 years. Every job, every person he's made disappear. It's a prosecutor's dream. Brynn thought about that. 50 years of making people vanish, of destroying families, of covering up crimes. How many others? How many people like my father? We're still going through it, but at least a dozen, maybe more. Sandra's voice was heavy. Your father wasn't the first, and he wouldn't have been the last if you hadn't stopped this. An FBI agent approached, a tall woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of authority. Ms. Halver, I'm Special Agent Caroline Webb. I'm leading the investigation. I need to ask you some questions if you're up for it. Brynn nodded. Of course. They went inside, where Agent Webb had set up a makeshift interview area. She had a laptop, recording equipment, and thick files spread across the table. I want to start by saying that what you did was incredibly brave, Webb began. But it was also incredibly dangerous. You should have come to us first, before going into the field. I didn't know who to trust. My father tried to report what he found, and they killed him for it. For all I knew, federal agencies were compromised. Some were. Back in the 80s, Halstead Mining had people in the Interior Department, the BLM, even a few in the EPA. But we've cleaned house since then. The people involved in the original corruption are long gone. Webb opened one of the files. What I need from you now is a complete statement. Everything that happened, from when you bought the horse to when Sheriff Coulter arrived. Every detail matters. Brynn spent the next 3 hours walking through the entire story. Webb was thorough, asking questions about dates, times, conversations, and locations. She was particularly interested in Owen Pritchard's involvement and what he'd told Brynn. Mr. Pritchard is cooperating fully, Webb said. He's provided a written statement about everything he knew and everything he should have reported 40 years ago. He's not facing charges. The statute of limitations has expired on most of his potential offenses, and frankly, his testimony is more valuable than his prosecution. He's a good man who made a bad choice. He's lived with that guilt for 40 years. I understand, and for what it's worth, his current cooperation counts for something. Webb made a note on her laptop. Now, let's talk about Raymond Voss. Did he make any admissions during your confrontation? He admitted to killing my father, said it was just business, nothing personal. We have that on the recording device Agent Kincaid was carrying. It's admissible evidence. Webb looked up from her computer. Voss is 73 years old. He'll spend whatever time he has left in federal prison. And based on what we're finding in his journal, he'll face charges in multiple jurisdictions. He'll never see freedom again. Brynn felt something release in her chest. Not quite relief, but close. Justice wouldn't bring her father back, wouldn't give her the years she'd lost with him. But it was something. It was accountability. What about Halstead Mining? Brynn asked. The company still exists, doesn't it? Under different ownership and a different name. But we're investigating the current corporate structure to see if there's continuity of liability. The environmental damage they caused hasn't gone away just because they changed their letterhead. Webb closed her laptop. This is going to be a long process, Ms. Halver. The investigation, the prosecutions, the civil cases. We're talking about years of legal proceedings. Are you prepared for that? I've waited 40 years for answers. I can wait a few more for justice to run its course. Good. Because we're going to need you to testify. Multiple times, probably. And it won't be easy. Defense attorneys will try to discredit you, question your motives. paint you as someone with a vendetta rather than someone seeking truth. Let them try. Webb smiled slightly. I like you, Miss Halver. You remind me why I took this job. She stood and gathered her files. You're free to go. We'll be in touch as the investigation progresses. In the meantime, if you remember anything else, anything at all, you call me directly. She handed Brynn a business card, and Brynn tucked it into her pocket, alongside all the other pieces of her father's life she'd collected on this journey. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and gold. Brynn found Tracker in a makeshift corral someone had set up, eating grain from a bucket. He looked content, unbothered by all the activity around him. You did good, friend, she told him, running her hand along his neck. Better than anyone expected. Sheriff Coulter approached, moving slowly. He looked exhausted. Hell of a day. That's one way to put it. I called Linda Pritchard, told her Owen's all right, that he helped break this whole thing open. She was relieved, and mad as hell that he came up here at his age with his heart condition, but mostly relieved. Coulter leaned against the fence. He's a lucky man, having someone who cares that much. Brynn thought about her own mother, about the years Grace had carried the burden of silence alone. We all need someone who cares that much. Speaking of which, there's someone here who wants to see you. Brynn turned to see Kyle Brennan, the young wilderness guide she'd met on the trail. He approached cautiously, as if unsure of his welcome. Ms. Halver, I heard what happened. I wanted to make sure you were okay. I'm fine. What are you doing here? I was the one who called it in. When I saw the helicopter and all the snowmobiles heading into this area, I knew something was wrong. I contacted the sheriff, told him there was unusual activity in the back country. He shrugged, figured it couldn't hurt to check. You might have saved my life. Just mountain courtesy, same as I told you before. He hesitated. Your father, Jacob Halver. I did some research after we talked. He was something of a legend in surveying circles. People still talk about his work, about how thorough and honest he was. He was a good man. He raised a good daughter. Kyle smiled. If you ever need a guide for these mountains, or just someone to ride with, you know where to find me. After he left, Brynn stood watching the sunset. The mountains looked the same as they always had, eternal, indifferent to human concerns. But something had changed. The weight she'd carried for 40 years was lighter now. Not gone, maybe never completely gone, but lighter. She thought about her father's final note, about the mountains being in her blood. He was right. She'd found her way home, not just geographically but emotionally. She'd found the truth, and with it, a kind of peace. Agent Webb approached one more time. Ms. Halver, there's something else. We found coordinates in your father's survey notes, the exact location where he was killed. It's about 2 miles from here, near a ravine. Would you like to see it? To have closure? Brynn considered. Part of her wanted to see the place, to stand where her father had taken his last breath. But another part of her knew it wouldn't change anything. The place didn't matter. What mattered was that the truth was known, that justice was being served. No, she said finally. I don't need to see where he died. I'd rather remember him alive, doing work he believed in, fighting for what was right. Webb nodded. I understand. But if you change your mind, I can arrange it. Thank you. But I won't change my mind. As darkness fell, the FBI began breaking down the command post. They'd return in daylight to continue processing evidence, but for now, the immediate crisis was over. Sandra found Brynn one last time before leaving. I'm heading back to Denver tonight, But I'll be in touch. Your father's case. It's going to be my priority. I'm going to make sure everyone involved faces consequences. I appreciate that. And Brynn, what you did today, finding that evidence, protecting it, getting it to us, it's going to make a difference. Not just for your father's case, but for environmental protection nationwide. This is going to set precedents, change policies. Your father's work will have an impact that lasts generations. After Sandra left, Brynn was alone with Tracker and Sheriff Coulter. You staying up here tonight? Coulter asked. No. I think it's time to go home. I'll escort you down. Make sure you get there safe. They rode together in comfortable silence, Tracker following the trail with his usual steady patience. The moon rose, full and bright, turning the snow-covered landscape into something magical. Brynn touched the pocket watch through her jacket, feeling its steady tick. Time had stopped for her father 40 years ago, but it was moving again now. Moving forward, toward justice, toward healing, toward whatever came next. When they reached the trailhead where Brynn's truck was parked, Coulter helped her load Tracker into the trailer. You know, he said, Grace would be proud of you. She did everything she could to keep you safe, to give you a chance at a normal life. But deep down, I think she always knew you'd do this, that you'd finish what your father started. She knew me better than I knew myself. That's what mothers do. He tipped his hat. Get some rest, Brynn. You've earned it. The drive home took an hour, winding through darkness and familiar roads. When Brynn finally pulled up to her cabin, she sat in the truck for a long moment, just looking at the place she'd built for herself all those years ago. She'd left this morning as someone searching for answers. She was returning as someone who'd found them. She unloaded Tracker and got him settled in the corral with fresh hay and water. He seemed content to be back, his clouded eyes turning toward the familiar sounds and smells of home. Inside the cabin, everything was exactly as she'd left it. The map on the table, the journal, the photographs, pieces of a puzzle she'd finally solved. Brynn made herself tea and sat at the table, pulling out all the artifacts she'd collected on her journey. The pocket watch, the compass, the photograph of her father with Owen and Voss, her father's letters. She read the letter to her one more time, the one he'd left in the metal box. The words hit differently now, weighted with the knowledge of everything that had happened since. Her father had known he might die, had accepted it as the price of doing what was right. He'd hidden the evidence and trusted that someday someone would find it and finish his work, that someone had turned out to be his daughter. Brynn thought about her mother, about all the times she'd wanted to tell Grace she forgave her for the lies. But Grace had died before Brynn knew there was anything to forgive, before Brynn understood that every lie had been an act of love. I understand now, Mum, she said to the empty cabin. I understand everything you did and why you did it. Thank you for keeping me safe. Thank you for waiting until I was ready. Thank you for loving Dad enough to protect his legacy, even when it cost you everything. The cabin was quiet, except for the ticking of the pocket watch and the sound of wind in the pines outside. Brynn stood and walked to the window, looking out at the mountains silhouetted against the starlit sky. Somewhere up there, in those high places her father had loved, the truth had been buried for 40 years. Now it was free, out in the light where it belonged. Tomorrow, she'd start the next phase, working with the FBI, preparing for trials, helping ensure that justice was fully served. It would be hard work, emotionally draining work, but it was work worth doing. Tonight, though, she would rest. She would honor her father's memory and her mother's sacrifice by simply being here, in this place they'd all loved, under these mountains that held their stories, she made up her bed in the loft and climbed up, the pocket watch still in her hand. As she drifted off to sleep, she could swear she heard her father's voice, on the wind, saying the words he'd written in his final letter. "I'm proud of you, daughter. I've always been proud of you." And for the first time in 40 years, Brynn Halver slept without the weight of unanswered questions pressing on her chest. 3 months had passed since Brynn came down from the mountains with her father's evidence. Winter had given way to early spring, and the high country was beginning to thaw, revealing what the snow had hidden. The FBI had been thorough. Agent Webb called every few weeks with updates, new evidence discovered, new connections made, the case growing stronger and more comprehensive. Raymond Voss had finally started talking, offering testimony in exchange for a slightly reduced sentence. His admissions had opened doors to investigations across multiple states. Brynn was in her workshop, repairing a saddle for a neighbor, when Sheriff Coulter's truck pulled into her yard. She knew from his expression that this wasn't a social visit. "They found him," Coulter said without preamble. "They found your father's remains." Brynn set down the leather she'd been working on, her hands suddenly unsteady. "Where?" "Near the ravine Agent Webb mentioned. The snow melt exposed the site. The FBI's forensic team has been up there for 2 days. He pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. "They found this with the remains. Thought you should see it." It was her father's wedding ring, tarnished but intact, still recognizable. "They're bringing everything down today," Coulter continued gently. "Webb wanted to know if you'd like to be there, to see him laid to rest properly, finally." Brynn nodded, not trusting her voice. They drove to the site together. Not the high alpine basin where she'd found the evidence, but a location lower down, accessible by logging road. The FBI had set up a perimeter, and forensic specialists were carefully excavating the site. Agent Webb met them at the edge of the perimeter. "Ms. Halver, I'm glad you came. Your father deserves to have family here. What can you tell me about what happened?" Webb led her to a tent where preliminary findings were being documented. The remains were found at the base of a ravine. Based on Voss's testimony and the physical evidence, your father was shot twice, once in the chest, once in the head. He died instantly. His body was hidden here, covered with rocks and debris. Voss said he chose this location because it was remote, unlikely to be disturbed. Brynn absorbed this information, each word a small knife. "Did he suffer?" "No. The forensic pathologist says death would have been immediate." "It was small comfort, but it was something." "We're treating this as a crime scene," Webb continued. "Every piece of evidence is being documented. When we're finished here, we'll release the remains to you. You can arrange whatever kind of service you want." Brynn watched the forensic team work, their movements careful and respectful. They were treating her father's remains with dignity, and that mattered. "There's something else," Webb said. "We found bullet casings at the site. They match a weapon that was registered to Raymond Voss in 1985. Between the casings, his testimony, and your father's evidence, we have an airtight case for murder in the 1st degree. When's the trial?" "Jury selection starts in 2 weeks. It'll be held in federal court in Denver. You'll need to testify. We discussed this before. Are you still willing?" "Yes." "Good. Because Voss's attorney is going to try every trick in the book. They'll argue that the evidence is too old, that memories have faded, that you have a personal vendetta. You need to be prepared for them to attack your credibility." "I'm prepared." Webb studied her face. "I believe you are." They spent the rest of the day at the site. Brynn sat in Coulter's truck, watching as the forensic team completed their work. As the sun began to set, they brought out a transport case, simple, dignified, containing what remained of Jacob Halver. Agent Webb approached the truck. "We're done here. You can make arrangements with any funeral home you choose. The FBI will cover all costs. It's the least we can do." "Thank you. And Ms. Halver, I've been doing this work for 20 years. I've seen a lot of families destroyed by crimes that were never solved, victims who were never found. What you did, finding your father, bringing his killers to justice, it's rare. Cherish it." That night, Brynn sat in her cabin with her mother's journal. She found an entry from shortly after her father disappeared, one she'd read many times, but that hit differently now. They came today, asking questions about where Jacob might have gone. I told them I didn't know. They seemed satisfied, but I'm not sure they believed me. I'm scared. Not for myself, but for Brynn. She's so young, and she's lost so much already. I have to protect her, no matter what it costs me. I have to keep her safe. Brynn closed the journal and picked up her phone. She'd been putting this off, but it was time. She called the number Agent Webb had given her for the funeral home that had experience with cases like this. She made arrangements for a proper burial. Her father would be laid to rest beside her mother in the cemetery in town. Finally together again after 40 years apart. The funeral was small, held on a clear spring morning. Sheriff Coulter was there, and Owen Pritchard, leaning heavily on his cane but determined to pay his respects. Linda stood beside him, her hand on his arm. Sandra Kincaid flew in from Denver. Kyle Brennan came, and a few other locals who remembered Jacob Halver and wanted to honor his memory. The minister spoke about justice delayed but not denied, about truth prevailing over decades of silence. But Brynn barely heard the words. She was thinking about her father, about the man he'd been. Principled, brave, devoted to his family and his work. Owen approached her after the service. He looked older, frailer than when she'd last seen him. "I should have done this 40 years ago," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Should have stood beside your father, helped him fight. Instead, I let fear turn me into a coward. You're here now. That's what matters." "Is it enough?" Brynn thought about that. "I don't know, but it's something. And sometimes, something is all we can manage." Owen nodded, tears in his eyes. "He was my friend, the best friend I ever had, and I failed him. He would have forgiven you. He understood fear. He just didn't let it stop him." After everyone left, Brynn stood alone at the grave. The headstone was simple. Jacob Halver, 1943 to 1985. He fought for what was right. "I found them, Dad," she said quietly. "I found the evidence, and I found the men who killed you. They're going to pay for what they did. I promise you that." The wind moved through the trees, carrying the scent of pine and spring flowers. "Mum kept your secrets safe. She protected me the way you asked her to. And when I was ready, she gave me the tools to finish your work." Brynn's voice broke. "I wish I'd understood sooner. I wish I hadn't spent so many years being angry with her." But Grace had known, had accepted Brynn's anger as part of the price of keeping her safe. That was the kind of love that asked for nothing in return, that bore misunderstanding and resentment without complaint. Brynn placed her hand on the headstone. "Rest now. Both of you. I'll take it from here." She walked back to her truck, where Tracker waited in the trailer. The old horse had become a permanent part of her life, a living connection to her father and to the journey that had brought her the truth. As she drove home, her phone rang. It was Agent Webb. "Ms. Halver, I wanted to give you a heads up. Voss's attorney just filed a motion to suppress your father's evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally. They're arguing that because you didn't have a warrant and you were technically trespassing on private property, Everything you found is inadmissible." Brynn felt ice in her stomach. Can they do that? They can try. But the property where you found the evidence was federal land that had been illegally transferred to private ownership through fraud. We're arguing that the transfer was void, which means you weren't actually trespassing. It's complicated, but our legal team is confident we'll prevail. What happens if you don't? We still have Voss's confession, the forensic evidence from the burial site, and his personal journal documenting the murder. We'd still have a strong case. But your father's evidence would make it airtight. We want to use it. When will you know? The judge is hearing arguments next week. I'll call you as soon as we have a ruling. Webb paused. Try not to worry. We've been building toward this for 3 months. We're not going to let a legal technicality derail everything your father died for. After she hung up, Brynn pulled over to the side of the road. Her hands were shaking, and she needed a moment to steady herself. She'd thought the hard part was over. Finding the evidence, surviving the confrontation in the mountains, identifying her father's remains. But the legal battle was just beginning, and it threatened to undo everything. She pulled out her father's pocket watch, holding it in her palm. It ticked steadily, reliable and true. Time kept moving forward, whether she was ready or not. "I won't let them bury this again," she said aloud. "Whatever it takes, Dad. Whatever it takes." She drove home and spent the evening preparing. If she was going to testify in court, she needed to be ready for anything. She reviewed her statement, went over the timeline of events, made sure every detail was clear in her mind. The trial would be the final confrontation, not with guns in the wilderness, but with words in a courtroom. And Brynn intended to make sure that this time the truth would win. The federal courthouse in Denver was an imposing building of stone and glass designed to inspire respect for the law. Brynn stood outside, smoothing her jacket, the nicest clothes she owned, purchased specifically for this day. Sandra Kincaid stood beside her, offering quiet support. "Remember," Sandra said, "just tell the truth. Don't let the defense attorney rattle you. Answer the questions directly and simply." "I've been preparing for this my whole life." "I know. But it's different when you're actually in there, under oath, with everyone watching. Just breathe through it." They entered together, passing through security and making their way to the courtroom. Agent Webb met them in the hallway. "The judge ruled in our favor," she said without preamble. "Your father's evidence is admissible. Voss's attorney tried to argue illegal search and seizure, but the judge agreed with our position that the property transfer was fraudulent. Everything you found can be used." Brynn felt relief flood through her. "What about Voss? How's he handling it?" "He knows he's finished. His attorney's trying to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecution isn't interested. We want a full trial, a public record of everything he did." The courtroom was already filling with people, journalists, legal observers, representatives from environmental organizations. This case had attracted national attention. The daughter of a murdered surveyor, 40 years later, bringing his killers to justice. It was the kind of story that resonated. Brynn took her seat in the gallery, and a few minutes later, they brought Raymond Voss in. He was dressed in an orange jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. He looked older than when she'd seen him in the mountains, diminished somehow. Prison was wearing on him. Their eyes met across the courtroom, and Brynn saw something flicker in his expression. Not quite remorse, but maybe the beginning of understanding that his actions had consequences. The judge entered, and everyone stood. Judge Patricia Morrison was in her 60s, with sharp eyes and a reputation for running an efficient courtroom. She surveyed the room, then called the proceedings to order. We're here today for the trial of Raymond Voss, charged with first-degree murder in the death of Jacob Halver, and multiple counts of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and racketeering. Is the prosecution ready? The lead prosecutor, a woman named Victoria Chen, stood. We are, Your Honor. Is the defense ready? Voss's attorney, a slick-looking man named Richard Caldwell, stood as well. We are, Your Honor. Then let's begin with opening statements. Victoria Chen approached the jury, her bearing confident but not arrogant. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is a case about a good man who tried to do the right thing, and the forces of greed and corruption that killed him for it. Jacob Halver was a land surveyor, a professional who took pride in accuracy and honesty. In 1985, while conducting a routine property survey, he discovered illegal mining operations on protected federal land. The companies involved were extracting millions of dollars in minerals, and they'd paid off government officials to look the other way. Jacob Halver documented everything. He took photographs, collected samples, recorded detailed notes, and then he made the fatal decision to report what he'd found. For that, he was murdered. She paused, letting that sink in. The defendant, Raymond Voss, was what's known in criminal circles as a fixer. When wealthy and powerful people had problems, they called Voss to make those problems disappear. And that's exactly what he did to Jacob Halver. On April 10th, 1985, Voss shot Jacob Halver twice, once in the chest, once in the head, and buried his body in a remote ravine. For 40 years he thought he'd gotten away with it. But he didn't count on Jacob's daughter, Brynn Halver. She never stopped looking for the truth. And when she found it, she brought it to us. Now finally, Raymond Voss will answer for his crimes. Caldwell's opening statement was predictable. He painted Voss as a scapegoat, argued that the evidence was circumstantial, suggested that even if a crime had occurred, the passage of 40 years made it impossible to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, who was responsible. The prosecution wants you to believe that my client is some kind of monster, Caldwell said. But where's the proof? A confession obtained under duress while my client was facing armed federal agents in the wilderness? Evidence collected by a civilian with no legal authority? This is a rush to judgment, ladies and gentlemen. Don't let emotion cloud your assessment of the facts. The trial proceeded. The prosecution called witnesses, forensic experts who testified about the remains and how Jacob Halver had died, FBI agents who described Voss's confession and the contents of his journal, environmental scientists who explained the extent of the illegal mining operations. And then, on the third day, they called Brynn to the stand. She walked to the witness box, her heart pounding but her steps steady. She was sworn in, promised to tell the truth, and sat down. Victoria Chen approached with a kind smile. Ms. Halver, can you tell the jury about your father? Brynn took a breath. Jacob Halver was a land surveyor. He was good at his work, meticulous and honest. He believed that the land belonged to everyone, that it was worth protecting. He loved the mountains. He loved his family. And when he found evidence of crimes being committed against the land he'd spent his life mapping and protecting, he couldn't stay silent. When did you learn what had happened to him? Not until 3 years ago, when I found my mother's journal after she passed away. Before that, I thought he'd abandoned us. That's what my mother told me, and I believed her. But the journal revealed the truth. She knew he'd been killed. She knew, and she kept it secret to protect me. How did that make you feel? Angry at first, betrayed. But then I understood. She was doing what my father asked her to do, keeping me safe until I was old enough and strong enough to handle the truth. Chen guided Brynn through the story, finding the map, buying tracker at the auction, the journey into the mountains, discovering her father's evidence. And when you found the evidence, what did you do? I protected it. I knew men were coming for it, the same kind of men who'd killed my father. I created a diversion, led them away so Agent Kincaid could escape with the evidence and get it to authorities. You put yourself in danger to protect your father's work? Yes, because it mattered. Because the truth mattered more than my safety. Chen turned to the jury. That's courage, ladies and gentlemen. That's what it looks like when someone refuses to let injustice stand. Then it was Caldwell's turn. He approached with a practiced expression of sympathy that didn't quite reach his eyes. Ms. Halver, I'm sorry for your loss. Truly. But I have to ask, isn't it possible that your grief, your desire to find someone to blame for your father's death, has colored your perception of events? No. You spent 40 years believing your father abandoned you. That's a heavy burden of anger to carry. When you found out he was actually killed, didn't you want someone to pay for that? Someone to punish? I wanted justice. That's not the same as revenge, isn't it? Caldwell picked up a document. You purchased a horse for $1, a horse that led you on this quest. Some might say that's almost too convenient, like you were looking for any excuse to go into those mountains. The horse had my father's brand. It was a real connection to him. Or it was a coincidence that you interpreted as a sign because you wanted it to be true. Brynn kept her voice steady. The evidence speaks for itself. My father's photographs, his notes, the mineral samples, none of that is coincidence. Caldwell changed tactics. You confronted my client in a remote location, armed with a rifle. You pointed that weapon at him. Isn't it possible that his confession was given under duress, with a gun aimed at him? I never pointed my rifle at him until his men started shooting at me. And his confession was recorded by Agent Kincaid before any of that happened. But you can't deny that you threatened him. I defended myself. There's a difference. The cross-examination continued for another hour. Caldwell probing for weaknesses, trying to make Brynn seem vengeful or unstable. But she held firm, answering each question calmly and truthfully. Finally, Chen stood for redirect. Ms. Halver, why did you risk your life to find this evidence? Brynn looked at the jury. Because my father died, trying to expose criminals who were destroying protected land for profit. He believed that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for. I wanted to honor that. I wanted to make sure his death meant something. And has it? Has his death meant something? Yes. The evidence he gathered is being used to prosecute not just his killer, but the companies and officials who enabled those crimes. His work is protecting land for future generations. That's what he would have wanted. When Brynn stepped down from the stand, she felt drained, but also strangely light. She'd told her father's story. She'd honored his memory. Whatever the jury decided, she'd done everything she could. The trial continued for another week. More witnesses, more evidence, experts testifying about Voss's journal and what it revealed about decades of criminal activity. And then, finally, closing arguments. Victoria Chen was powerful and direct. Raymond Voss is a murderer. The evidence proves it beyond any reasonable doubt. He confessed to the killing. His journal documents it. The forensic evidence corroborates it. And the motive is clear. Jacob Halver was a threat to wealthy, powerful interests, and Voss eliminated that threat. For 40 years he thought he'd escaped justice, but justice has finally caught up to him. Hold him accountable, find him guilty. Caldwell's closing was desperate, grasping at straws. The prosecution wants revenge, not justice. They want to blame my client for crimes that may have been committed by others, or that may not have been crimes at all. 40 years is too long. Memories fade, evidence degrades. You cannot find my client guilty based on such flimsy, circumstantial connections. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, Brynn was in the courtroom, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Morrison asked. The foreperson stood. "We have, Your Honor. What say you?" In the matter of the United States versus Raymond Voss, on the charge of first-degree murder, we find the defendant guilty. The courtroom erupted. Journalists rushed to file stories. Environmentalists cheered. Voss sat motionless, his face blank. Brynn closed. Her eyes and felt tears slip down her cheeks. 40 years. 40 years of waiting. And finally, justice had come. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for order. "Mr. Voss, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers. Sentencing will be scheduled for next month. Until then, you will remain in custody. This court is adjourned." Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed Brynn, shouting questions. Agent Webb and Sheriff Coulter formed a protective barrier, helping her to a waiting car. But before they could leave, Brynn turned back to the cameras. "My father, Jacob Halver, was a good man who died protecting the land he loved. Today, justice was served. I hope that everyone who knew him, everyone who wondered what happened to him, can finally have peace. Thank you." In the car, driving away from the courthouse, Brynn pulled out her father's pocket watch. It ticked steadily in her palm, marking time that had finally, after 40 years of being frozen, started moving again. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. "We finally did it." The summer came to the mountains with wildflowers and warm winds, transforming the high country into something both familiar and new. Brynn stood on her porch, watching the sun rise over the eastern peaks, coffee in hand, and Tracker grazing peacefully in the meadow below. 3 months had passed since the verdict. Raymond Voss had been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Additional charges were still being filed against the corporations and individuals his journal had implicated. The case had sparked a nationwide investigation into legacy mining corruption, and Agent Webb reported that at least a dozen new prosecutions were in progress. Owen Pritchard had passed away in his sleep 2 weeks after the trial. Linda said he'd gone peacefully, finally unburdened by the secret he'd carried for so long. Brynn had spoken at his funeral, talking about how courage could come late in life, but still matter. How honesty, even delayed, was better than continued silence. The mountains had become different for Brynn since finding her father's remains and seeing justice served. They were no longer hiding places for secrets and sorrow, but monuments to persistence and truth. Every ridge and valley held memories now, not just of what had been lost, but of what had been found. Her phone rang, breaking the morning silence. It was Sandra Kincaid. "Brynn, I have news. The EPA is establishing a new protected wilderness area in the high country where your father did his survey work. They're naming it the Jacob Halver Wilderness Preserve. 600,000 acres of protected land, safeguarded forever from mining and development." Brynn felt her throat tighten. That would have meant everything to him. "There's more. They want you to be at the dedication ceremony. They want you to help unveil the memorial marker. It's scheduled for next month, on what would have been your father's 82nd birthday. I'll be there." After hanging up, Brynn walked down to the meadow where Tracker grazed. The old horse lifted his head at her approach, his clouded eyes turning toward the sound of her footsteps. "We're going on another trip," she told him, running her hand along his neck. "Not as hard as the last one, I promise. Just a ceremony to honor the man who made all of this possible." She'd kept tracker, of course, the horse that had started everything, that had borne the brand connecting her to her father's final days. He'd gained weight, his coat was glossy, and despite his blindness and age, he seemed content. She took him on gentle rides through the mountains, and he'd become a familiar sight in the valley, the old horse and the woman who'd solved a 40-year-old murder. Sheriff Coulter stopped by later that morning, as he often did. Their friendship had deepened through the ordeal, and he'd become something like family to her. "Heard about the wilderness area," he said, accepting the coffee she offered. "Your father's name on 600,000 acres of protected land. That's a legacy. It's what he would have wanted. More than any courthouse verdict or prison sentence, this is what mattered to him. The land, preserved for future generations. Grace would be proud too. What she did, keeping you safe all those years, it wasn't easy. But it worked. You survived to finish his work." Brynn thought about her mother often now, with understanding rather than anger. She'd had Grace's headstone updated to read, "Grace Halver, 1924 to 2022. She kept faith with those she loved." It felt right, honoring both the burden Grace had carried and the love that had motivated it. A few days later, a package arrived from Agent Webb. Inside was a framed photograph, the original of the image Brynn had found in the hollow tree post. Her father, Owen, and Raymond Voss standing together on what had been the last day of normal work before everything changed. Attached was a note from Webb. "This was evidence in the trial, but it's yours now. Your father deserves to be remembered as he was. Proud, professional, doing work he believed in. The man who stood beside him may have betrayed him, but that doesn't change who your father was." Brynn placed the photograph on her mantel, beside her father's pocket watch and compass. Artifacts of a life cut short, but a life that had mattered. Kyle Brennan had become a regular visitor, stopping by once or twice a week to check on her or to share trail conditions and wilderness news. There was an easy comfort between them, the beginning of something that might grow into friendship or perhaps more. Brynn wasn't rushing to define it. She'd learned that some things developed at their own pace, in their own time. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset, Kyle asked, "What will you do now? You've spent so much of your life searching for answers. Now that you have them, what comes next?" Brynn considered the question. "I'm going to live. Really live. Not just exist in the shadow of unanswered questions. I'm going to ride these mountains, help with the wilderness preserve, maybe do some surveying work myself, carrying on my father's profession. And I'm going to be here, present, for whatever comes." That sounds good. It does, doesn't it? The dedication ceremony for the Jacob Halver Wilderness Preserve was held on a clear August morning, with mountains rising on all sides and the scent of pine on the breeze. Hundreds of people attended, environmentalists, government officials, locals who remembered Jacob, and representatives from surveying and conservation organizations. Brynn stood at the podium, looking out at the crowd, and then beyond them to the wild country that stretched for miles in every direction. "My father believed that some things were worth protecting," she began. "Not because they had monetary value, but because they had intrinsic worth. Beauty for its own sake, wilderness for future generations, truth, even when it was dangerous to pursue. He died protecting these beliefs, and for 40 years, the truth of his death was buried along with his body. But truth has a way of surviving, even when people try to kill it. It waits patiently for someone to dig it up and bring it into the light. She paused, gathering her thoughts. My mother kept that truth safe until I was ready to carry it. She sacrificed her own peace, lived with lies and silence, because she loved me and wanted me to survive to finish my father's work. So this preserve honors two people, the man who documented the crimes and the woman who protected that documentation until it could be used. She unveiled the memorial marker, a simple bronze plaque mounted on native stone. Jacob Halver Wilderness, preserve named in honor of Jacob Halver, 1943–1985, land surveyor and conservationist who gave his life protecting these mountains. The land tells you everything you need to know. You just have to learn its language. After the ceremony, people approached Brynn with stories about her father. Co-workers who remembered his precision and integrity. Ranchers he'd helped settle boundary disputes. Fellow surveyors who'd learned their craft from him. Each story added another dimension to her understanding of who he'd been. As the crowd dispersed, Brynn walked alone into the preserve, following a trail her father had once mapped. Tracker was too old for the steep terrain, so she went on foot, carrying her father's compass to guide her. She climbed for an hour, reaching a ridge that offered views in all directions. The land stretched out before her, wild and protected, exactly as her father would have wanted it. She pulled out the pocket watch and opened it, watching the hands move steadily forward. Time had stopped for Jacob Halver in 1985, but his legacy lived on. In this preserve. In the justice that had finally been served. In his daughter, who learned his language of the land and used it to find the truth. Brynn thought about the journey that had brought her here. A $1 horse with a faded brand, a map hidden in a suitcase lining, evidence sealed in a metal box and buried for 40 years. Each piece a gift from her father, leading her step by step to this moment. "Thank you, Dad," she said to the mountains and the wind, "for teaching me to read the land, for showing me what's worth fighting for believing I'd be strong enough to finish what you started." The wind moved through the trees, and in it Brynn heard the whisper of her father's voice, her mother's love, and her own hard-won peace. She stood on that ridge for a long time, watching the light change on the mountains her father had loved, the mountains that were in her blood, that had always been her home, the mountains that had finally, after 40 years, given up their secrets and allowed healing to begin. When she descended back to the valley, the sun was setting, painting everything in gold and amber. Sheriff Coulter was waiting by his truck, along with Sandra, Kyle, and Linda Pritchard. They'd become her family of sorts, people bound together by their connection to Jacob's story and their commitment to seeing justice served. "You all right?" Coulter asked. "Better than all right. I'm at peace." They drove back to town together, talking about the ceremony and the preserve and the future. Brynn listened, content to be part of the conversation, to belong to a community again after so many years of isolation. That night, alone in her cabin, Brynn took out her mother's journal one last time. She'd read it so often the pages were soft, the binding loose. She turned to the last entry, written just a week before Grace's death. "If you're reading this, Brynn, then I'm gone and you've found the map. I've waited so long to give it to you, watching you grow strong and capable, waiting for the right time. That time is now. Find your father's evidence, finish his work, and know that everything I did, every lie I told, every year of silence, was because I loved you both more than life itself. Your father died a hero. Live your life honoring that legacy. Be brave, my daughter. Be true, and know that we both loved you beyond measure." Brynn closed the journal and placed it on the shelf alongside her father's survey notes and the framed photograph. These were her inheritance, not money or property, but truth and courage, and the stubborn determination to do what was right even when it was hard. She climbed to her sleeping loft and settled into bed, the pocket watch on the nightstand beside her. Its steady ticking was a comfort, a reminder that time moved forward, carrying stories and memories, but never stopping. Through the window she could see stars scattered across the night sky, and beyond them the silhouette of the mountains against the darkness. The same mountains her father had mapped, the same wilderness she'd helped preserve in his name. Brynn closed her eyes, and for the first time since her father disappeared 40 years ago, she felt complete. The questions had been answered. Justice had been served. The wounds, while never fully healed, had stopped bleeding. She'd found her way home, not just to the mountain she loved, but to a deeper understanding of family, sacrifice, and the enduring power of truth. Her father had taught her to read the land. Her mother had taught her to survive until the time was right. Together, they'd given her everything she needed to become who she was meant to be. In the morning, she would wake and continue the work of living, tending to tracker, maintaining the cabin, helping with the wilderness preserve, building relationships with the people who'd become her chosen family. The quiet, purposeful life she'd always wanted, but now enriched by understanding and connection rather than haunted by unanswered questions. But tonight, she rested, surrounded by artifacts of her father's life and her mother's love. With the mountains standing watch outside her window, Brynn Halver slept the deep, dreamless sleep of someone who had finished a long journey and finally come home. The pocket watch ticked on through the darkness, marking time that had been frozen for 40 years, but was now moving steadily forward, carrying the story of a mountain woman who bought a horse for $1 and found justice at the end of the trail.